Oh, he's got us muted. Can they hear us? Are we muted? No, I'm talking about Commissioner O'Donnell, Commissioner Smith. They're not acting like they can hear me talk. There we go.
Yeah, I was on mute.
Okay. All right. So we're ready to get started. So today is August 10th, 2021. It is just after 6 o'clock. I'm calling the Oregon City Commission work session to order. Jacob, will you please call the roll?
Present. Said no.
We can't hear anything. We can't hear you. We cannot hear you at all.
We figured that out. Oh, he's my, could you hear me say that?
Yes.
Okay, so you can hear us, you can hear the commissioners, but you can't hear Jacob call the roll, is essentially. Okay, so I'll finish calling the roll. Commissioner Rocky Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell?
Here.
Commissioner Adam Morrow?
Here.
And myself, Mayor Rachel Al Smith, I'm here. All right, our first item on the agenda is a list of future work session agenda items. Mr. Conkle.
Thank you. So next week, August 18th, that housing needs analysis was changed at our last meeting with staff. So we'll be bringing that back at a later date. So then we're out into the September work sessions. Their topics include the abandoned and semi-abandoned buildings, compatible change update, and a Willamette Falls legacy project updates.
Okay, anything from commissioners? Commissioner Morrow.
Yes, so I'm interested in looking at how we do the elections. I want us to look at maybe following the lead of our neighbors in Westland, Lake Oswego, Wilsonville, Canby, Estacada. We have positions, and I think it would be a benefit for us to look at maybe doing a vote for two or vote for three sort of system when we elect commissioners, just solely for commissioners, so that, you know, if there are two great candidates running for one position and two not so great candidates running for another, I can vote for the two great ones without compromising my choices. And then also looking at mayoral appointments to Planning Commission and HRB.
Yes, I see Commissioner O'Donnell, you have your hand raised before I call you. Jacob, real quick, so can Commissioner O'Donnell and Commissioner Smith actually see us? The video looks like it's off, so they don't, and you. Okay, so commissioners, if you could not hear that, Jacob's going to check with the AV tech to try to change that video so that you can actually see us instead of the, it looks like you're probably seeing the commission chambers. That image is probably what you're seeing. All right.
That's correct.
Commissioner O'Donnell, do you have comments?
Well, I would simply say I support Adam Marl's proposition. As you know, I proposed it at one point, but it wasn't timely, and I believe Mr. Mike Mitchell also proposed it. So I would certainly support taking action on both those matters that Commissioner Marl brought up.
Right. Yeah, I would generally agree with that as well. I think the question, and we've talked about this as a commission before, I think the real question is, when we talked about it before, the city commission could decide, I believe, if they wanted to, this would be charter changes and would need to go to the ballot. So the city commission could make the decision on items that they wanted to propose for charter changes. Or we also talked about possibly creating a charter committee to work on charter changes. But obviously, we never took it past that conversation as to what the recommendation is from the commission or how we would carry that out. So I guess, is this an item, Mr. Conkle, to bring back as a work session topic so we can talk about it some more? Maybe you could bring back some options or thoughts at an upcoming work session?
Certainly.
I'd appreciate that.
Is that,
yes.
okay.
Not a question. No hand to raise.
Yes, Commissioner McGriff.
Yeah, I am interested in the first topic, but I will be honest with you, it is not a high priority for me considering the amount of work that we have already given to ourselves. Plus, I want to see the implementation of at least some of our goals, particularly the one we have as number one, which is diversity, equity, inclusion. The second one is mainly a change of an ordinance in our municipal code. But, you know, given the list that we have, I'm going to ask the city manager to use his considerable discretion. Some of these things have been on the list for a long time. We've had other things we've bumped in. So I guess one of the things is we can have a discussion about that, about where it falls in here. I mean, you have them alphabetical, but there's some things on here that have been on here for a while. I know one of them's been on there for as long as I've been on the commission. So I'm just telling you that I don't object to it. I just not sure how far it falls into the priority list, and I'd like to have more discussion about whether we create a charter committee. We've already got a staff that's up to their eyeballs in alligators and adding one more thing. So I think it's something we can talk about further into the future at another time, as you suggested, have a further discussion about it.
Yeah, could I?
Yes, Commissioner Morrow.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't want to further stress out our city staff. More than anything, I want it to be an agenda for something to discuss in the future, just so that it's on our list, because I do think this is important to discuss, but I do not want it to derail the other important conversations that we're having as well.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell, is that a new hand or an old hand?
Yes, it is. It's a new hand. Maybe I should have it too. Yeah. I respectfully disagree. I think the issue is quite straightforward. I mean, all it needs is direction from this commission as we'd like to pursue this. The last time we ran into, I wanted to put it on the same ballot as the mayoral recall, and then obviously that was too complicated, but we have to watch the timing of putting forth things for elections and do this in a timely manner. And I think this question itself is simple, as defined by Commissioner Morrow. So I don't want to make it bigger than it is and create commissions and all. We have the obligation to lead and make a suggestion, and that suggestion could be voted on by the people, and there's our referendum. We don't need to make commissions and studies, and this is our thoughts. Do you agree to Oregon City, or do you not agree?
Yeah.
Wish it was.
So we have the May election coming up. Let's see, where are we at? I mean, I'm not counting this November. We have already got the water measure on this November. We're past deadlines. We're not talking about 2021. So 2022, we'd have May and November. I guess even timelines for a May ballot measure would be challenging given our plan of work that we have. So I guess it'd be interesting. I'm going to leave it for now, put it on the list of upcoming items and staff. Maybe you can work on that. Look at the timeline of either the next May or November ballot. We would essentially be working backwards off of our opportunities to put this on a ballot, I believe. Commissioner Rocky Smith.
I think we may want to have a conversation about how to handle meetings going forward as of tonight and tomorrow. I will tell you that Commissioner O'Donnell and myself I'm assuming Commissioner O'Donnell is doing the meeting from home in the same reason that I am doing the meeting from home, which is that our staff policy citywide is that our employees wear masks in the buildings, and that everyone wears masks in the buildings. I see that the three of you are not, which is going against what we expect our own staff attending the meeting in person because of that reason, to be consistent with our policy citywide, and I assume we should have. I'm hoping we're having a conversation about going back to Zoom for this short period, or at least upholding and following our own city guidelines.
Commissioner Smith, I had asked the city manager what the protocol was when I came in wearing my mask. So I was told that it is up to me at this point in time. When I am not talking, I will have it on. When I am talking, I'm not going to have it on because it's hard to hear.
Well, as far as I know, our policy is if you are not vaccinated, and I'm not sure that we are aware that everyone on that dais is vaccinated.
I am.
Okay, so this is not a conversation we're having right now. We're talking about agenda topics, and so we're going to move on to the
That's an
agenda.
agenda topic. So I'm asking that as an agenda topic. Thank you very much.
You're asking for it to be an agenda item?
I think we needed an agenda item to discuss the policy moving forward for meetings.
Oh, okay.
Especially the
I didn't
state
realize that
mandate.
was a request for that.
Yeah,
Okay.
he did say.
Well, then you weren't listening to the first part.
I don't need, I'd like to keep this professional. Please,
Well,
Commissioner
and you
Smith.
did as well by following the city guidelines.
So, Commissioner Smith would like to discuss, I guess I'm trying to figure out, or you want to discuss whether or not we're having virtual meetings moving forward? Usually staff has been following state mandates as to whether or not we have to close buildings, and right now there is not a mandate. There's a recommendation to wear masks inside. It's not mandated.
Tomorrow will be mandated.
What did you say? Say again?
There's the governor will be making an announcement tomorrow that it will be mandated, as far as I know.
I haven't heard anything.
I haven't heard anything, so we're talking about something that may happen in the future, and I think we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I think the recommendations and the mandates are changing on a daily basis. I saw one today about state employees and state workers, so it's literally changing on a regular basis. I think staff has done a good job of trying to jump through all the hoops and try to keep up with all the mandates that's going on, and they generally keep us informed as to whether or not we move to virtual meetings. It looks like the road we're heading down looks like we may end up back in all virtual meetings. I hope not, because it's nice to be in person.
I agree.
And it's much easier to have conversations and actually conduct these meetings in person, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
So I will add this to the agenda for the 18th. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think there just needs to be general consensus. I'm not sure what we're discussing.
I'm not arguing about anything, to be honest with you. I feel that we are far enough apart from each other, we're far enough apart from staff that I feel comfortable with what we're doing right now.
I agree with Commissioner McGriff.
Yeah, so I think there's general consensus that we're going to follow, if the governor comes out with a new order tomorrow, if that's what she's going to do, then obviously we'll stop having in-person meetings. The legislature did pass a rule that all governments have to provide a virtual and option. I don't know if you guys knew that, but it's a new law that passed this past legislative session. So it's a new requirement now that we've now entered into the digital age, and whether or not we meet in person or we have a digital meeting, all cities and local governments have to require that virtual online option so that they can participate and watch meetings. So just a sign of moving to new digital standards.
Our and our listeners are so proud to support the KGW school supply.
We're not sure what that was.
That was KGW, whatever that was.
Okay. Are there any other agenda item discussions, questions?
I actually wanted to before we get into item 2, 3, 4, and 5, I looked at this when we got it, and my concern is that it is pretty loaded. And we have, I know item 5 is going to take a considerable amount of time. I know that item 2 may take 2 and 3, which are coupled together. And then we have item 4. I just have a concern that we're not going to get through everything, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to adequately discuss within reason, not, 2 hours for each item, but I'm just concerned about the number of items that are under discussion. And even if we meet for 2.5 hours, I know that number 5 is got considerable, I don't want to use the word baggage, but it's got considerable weight behind it in terms of the situation.
Okay, so I was just trying to dismiss the future work session agenda items. Are we done with that topic? Nobody has any further?
No.
Commissioner O'Donnell, are you talking about what Commissioner McGriff just brought up? Or do you have, yes?
Yes, when you move on to that subject, I'll speak to it.
All right. With that, we will move on. And staff, I believe we've given you all kinds of information for number 1. So the topic is, are you proposing that we shift items around? Is that what you're proposing?
I'm proposing that something's got to get postponed, in my opinion. I know that the staff has worked hard on getting all the information, but I don't want to feel like any of the items are shortchanged, and I feel if we deal with all 5 of them tonight, something's going to get shortchanged.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I would support moving item 5 to 1 simply because it is the most pressing issue to many of our citizens. It may take extended amounts of time, and they've been waiting for an answer for an extended period of time. I'd just soon reach some resolution on that first and then move on. So yes, I would support rearranging the agenda if that meets the favor of the balance of the commission.
Do you also feel comfortable with us putting a specified amount of time? I want to be fair. I don't want to spend, 2 hours talking about one agenda item.
I never feel comfortable doing that because as you have said in the past, it takes as long as it takes. So
I understand that.
We just got to get it done.
I'm trying to think about Mayor Lyle Smith and meeting management and trying to be responsible to that particular concern.
I think the intent of the sidewalks was the beginning of a discussion. There were options laid out. There's financing decisions that need to be made. But so really it was the beginning of a discussion. I don't expect the commission to get through that discussion in one night because, we were really trying to say, here's what we've seen in the community and other communities. Here are options. Is there one or two that's more interesting that then we would dive in and bring that back?
Well, I would approach it trying to reach a resolution, and if we see that we start floundering, then we abandon ship and come back for a second try. But the stuff of carrying things over and over again, they just add up and we never get done. So I'm willing to give it a try, and we can decide as a group, if so needed, to abandon the discussion and see how far we get.
Any other commissioners want to rearrange? Is the staff okay with, are staff prepared to do the sidewalk repair assistance item now first?
Yep. Yes, we are.
All right. It looks like we're going to move the sidewalk repair assistance program up.
Looks like we do have the picture at the bottom of the screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been up. It doesn't sound like you're on. Your mic is on.
How's that? Is that
Oh, there
better?
you go. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Now we can hear you.
All right.
I'm not sure we at home can hear them.
Can you hear me, Frank?
Like from the bottom of a drum.
That's my deep voice. Can you hear me better now?
It's really really got nothing to do with your wonderful tenor of a voice, sir.
Okay, I'm not sure, is there anything that can be done about that before I jump in, or let's go? Okay, so thank you, Commission and Mayor, for taking on this item. It was back in May where we discussed this last, so it has been some time since we discussed sidewalks. And at the time, we were talking specifically about a particular neighborhood. This presentation that we're presenting tonight is more about a sidewalk program that would be a citywide program. And so in your packet, we presented a draft. It was very draft, and I'm going to go through that. I'm going to go through some background so that the community has a little better understanding of kind of what was discussed, and then talk about our code, and then really just lay out some scenarios of some cost implications or some contributions from this program to sidewalk repair assistance program. And then there are a handful of kind of what I think of as policy issues where we need direction. I think I agree there, if we're in agreement that we need a sidewalk repair assistance program, then it's a matter of just kind of filling in the blanks and help informing that in a way that is consistent with what the commission agrees to as a policy. So that's my intent.
Can you pause real quick? So Commissioner Smith raised his hand. I want to check. I assume maybe audio. You're muted. Commissioner Smith, you're muted.
We cannot hear any of this presentation. If we are mandated to have Zoom meetings, then we need to be able to do it.
Maybe he could try one of these mics up here.
He's going to try that one.
So he's switching to the mic at the public comment.
Let's do a sound check. Can you hear me now, Commissioner Smith? Much better. Okay.
All right, he gave you a thumbs up. Okay,
right.
Thank you.
Slide one is pretty much an introduction to the topic, so I'll go through really just kind of talk about a little bit of background and from what we talked about back in May, and then go through some of our codes and standards, explain, why the topic is before you, and maybe just share some of the anticipated costs of the program. And then, like I said, there's a lot of kind of gaps that need to be filled here that I think are policy decision maker kind of gaps that we'd like some direction on. And with that, we will bring back to you a more polished draft. So next slide, please. Okay, there we go. Development standards have evolved over time. Sidewalk widths, planter widths, curbs, how thick our pavement is. As we seek to improve and extend the life of these amenities, these standards need to change. So the same is true for street trees, and we recognize that the community and this commission is trying to balance the aesthetics with shade, with all the benefits that come along with a tree canopy, and things that property owners and neighborhoods value. So anyway, we've got good standards right now. Our standard really kind of puts that obligation, states it very clearly that the obligation for sidewalk maintenance and street tree maintenance resides with the property owner. We're not proposing in this plan to necessarily change that, but we are proposing, as suggested, that we produce a way to help with some of those sidewalk safety hazards to make for more walkable communities. So that's what we're up to. So next slide, please. So this is a citywide problem, and as I mentioned, and I'm not sure everybody heard, but we started this conversation about a particular neighborhood, just kind of recognizing that the problem is citywide. It's in our older neighborhoods and some of our newer neighborhoods, so we're addressing it as a citywide program. Street trees and the roots that they have do not discriminate. So that's another reason why it's a citywide program. There are lots of places where we have safety problems due to tree roots lifting the sidewalks.
In Oregon City, we've got a lot of places where the soils are very dense, and so dense soils combined with tree roots that don't have any kind of guards around them tend to go to the easiest source of water and the easiest source for them to grow and thrive, and that happens to be under these sidewalks. So this slide represents kind of a cross-section of the kind of problems that we see with regard to the conflicts between trees and sidewalks. I guess I'd point out the other problem is we get a few years of tree growth, and those trees then grow and mature enough to where they lift the sidewalks, and so we end up with a tree that's outlived it or outgrown its space, probably outlived its lifetime. So the tree gets cut, the sidewalk at that point is already lifted, and so we end up with kind of both, no tree and busted up sidewalk. So this program could help to resolve some of those issues, and something that we appreciate the commission asking for. Next slide. Why a sidewalk assistance program? Well, I think this is what we understand is this really trying to help address sidewalk damages, keep our sidewalks safe, and to help the property owners with the expense of having to maintain their obligation for frontage sidewalks and street trees. Code enforcement, planning, and engineering. We've all been working with property owners for years to balance this desire for street trees with the need for safe sidewalks. It's arduous work because no one is really succeeding at this time. Code enforcement is not in a position to change the codes and policies, and there's an overwhelming number of locations. Planning gets beat up over the original development approvals and the municipal code. Engineering gets some of the same kind of feedback. We see the sidewalk and street trees conflicts only resulting in more of the same. The property owners typically don't agree with all the requirements, and then they also get to pay for the needed repairs and improvements. So having a sidewalk assistance program is a good way to mitigate this problem and seems to help all involved. Next slide, please. So the goal, again, seems pretty straightforward. I just want to acknowledge that this would be a new program. It's an unplanned program. It's currently not a funded program. So the hope is that if implemented, we can manage a successful sidewalk repair assistance program and manage our fiduciary responsibility to whatever revenues you elect to dedicate to this program. This presentation is mostly focused on sidewalks, but we recognize the importance of street trees. And without hijacking the Oregon City Sidewalk Repair Assistance Program, I've added a couple of slides on the back end of the presentation to talk about tree management in Oregon City. And finally, there's a draft in your program. I just want to reemphasize that's very draft. I took that from the few agencies in Oregon that have tree assistance programs, and I looked at all of them and kind of cut and pasted those items that I thought were most appropriate and applicable for what would be good for Oregon City. Next slide. So you've seen this slide before. I'm just trying to give you a context of what the liability is. We've had a lot of development over the years. I think since 1998, we've nearly seen 4,000 different tax lots developed, lots of different subdivisions under a variety of different requirements for street trees and planter strip widths. We've got 158 miles of sidewalks. And in accordance with the code and the responsibility for these sidewalks, currently this sidewalk and the frontage sidewalks and the abutting are the responsibility of the abutting property owner. So there's really no question about it, and the code is very clear. It's, I think, as based on all that development that's happened over the years, this isn't a one and done kind of deal. This is an ongoing program, I think, that the City Commission is asking us to produce. And we'll ask that question again, but I think I know the answer that this is an ongoing street repair assistance program that we're talking about here. Next slide. I also didn't want to overstate the problem, and so Something about that looks wrong. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't want to overstate the problem. Obviously, there's a lot of homes out there, a lot of street trees out there. We've not had the ability to do a thorough inventory of how many problems we have. So I asked staff to pull some of the permit history on this. And while I agree the 2020 and the 2021 numbers were affected by COVID and the fact that we decided as a community to not press this topic, especially in 2021, but we've been working with property owners to try and deal with these issues as we always have. But in 2021, I think we've actually, those numbers look misrepresented. They're actual numbers. They're the numbers that we pulled out of our permit system. But I just thought it was what I used to try and establish how many permits we might see and try and put my arms around how big this program might be. So the other thing I want to point out is our sidewalk enforcement issues are complaint driven. So the city doesn't go out and actively identify trip hazards in Oregon City. So as they're reported, the city follows up on those. If there's one, within sight distance, they might mark that one, or typically would mark that one. But we're generally not actively trying to create a sidewalk replacement program. And I think that's another important factor is I think what I'm showing you is based on a complaint-driven system. If the city kind of said, look, we want to look at this neighborhood and take care of all the problems in that particular neighborhood, and we want to get through the city in a certain amount of time frame, it would probably be a bigger program than what I'm going to show you tonight. So keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go ahead and just walk through this. So we asked staff to go get some cost information so we could get a sense of what these repairs typically cost. And with recent data, I will tell you that it was difficult just to get contractors to provide cost information right now. As you can all imagine, contractors are very, very busy. But we did receive several. I would say 2 of them provided everything that we asked for. There were 3 or 4 others that provided bits and pieces. Maybe they did concrete work, but they didn't do, the full project where they'd come in and they'd cut out the tree, remove the tree, do the root grindings, etc. But we were able to pull that together and assembled these unit prices based on all that information. I kind of culminated that into a pretty simple form, rounded the numbers a little bit, if you will, rounded them in favor of the, essentially increased the unit price when it was, low what do I mean by that? I just mean I increased the averages to be a little more rounded numbers. So with that, I looked at a couple different scenarios. One is estimating the cost on an individual repair, and by individual repair, we're talking about a sidewalk that would include 2 panels. So most of our sidewalks are 5 feet wide, so 2 5-by-5 panels. That sidewalk cost came to an average of $1,600. And then I looked at the cost with tree removal, stump grinding, and tree replacement. We looked at a 12-inch diameter tree as the kind of the standard typical street tree. So we're not talking some larger ones that we know are out there. And obviously if they're smaller ones, then then those prices could vary. So these do vary a lot depending on the type of tree and the amount of damage that is done, but I was trying to get some ballpark numbers on that for you. The other thing, I think I mentioned this, the sidewalk panels were 5-by-5 and we assumed 2. And the other thing we heard was, look, these costs, depending on access, depending on traffic control, they're going to vary. So just know that this was an attempt to give you a reasonable cost range for the work. The other thing that we noticed, or that we pursued, was we looked at an individual cost, or we asked them for individual costs. We also asked them for a group rate cost. And in our example, we just said, assume you had 20 sites. That doesn't mean 20 properties, because a lot of these properties have multiple problems on those frontage sidewalks. So 20, 10 by 5 sidewalk repairs and the trees that go along with them. And so based on those numbers, rather than provide you all that detail, I just kind of looked at those, and it looked like that was about a 30% discount to have a contractor come in there and do something under a group permit. So the other thing I think this program should encourage is group permits. It saves the property owners money, and it would save the city money. And depending on the amount that the commission decides to allocate, if they decide to allocate, it would probably mean that would go that much further. Sidewalk grinding, again, fairly expensive for just one site, much more reasonable if you're doing a larger neighborhood. So $400 per site, or probably something more on the range of $200 if they're in there. A lot of these folks are trying to, they like a day's worth of work as opposed to, a day where they have to kind of come and go as the different trades play out. But sidewalk grinding is a good example of that, where they could come in and they could do multiple sites all at once for a much cheaper price.
So, Mr. Lewis, before you go on, so how many quotes did you get in order to come up with those average costs? 2 or 3?
For sidewalk grinding specifically?
Just in...
I would say in general, we got 4 quotes. There was a couple other side quotes, like I said, that didn't give us everything, and 2 that gave us prices for just about everything that we asked for.
Right.
So it was kind of tough to pull it out of them.
I guess the other comment I'll make is, so if the estimated cost per tree with sidewalk is $2,500 roughly, most of these homeowners have more than one tree that's needing to be replaced. So you're really looking at probably a $5,000, if they're coming out and replacing 2 trees, which is probably most properties have more than one tree, more than one sidewalk tree. Particularly the older neighborhoods who had nice bigger lots, they don't build them that big anymore. But, when the neighborhoods we're talking about, most of them probably have 2 to maybe even 4 trees, particularly if you have a corner lot. So that cost of $2,500 can go up pretty rapidly.
That's a super good point. I broke it out by site, not by property, so that, because what we saw is specifically in Timberview and, those 3 neighborhoods up there, was a lot of properties, corner properties in particular, that had probably 4 to 6 trees. I saw one that I think had 6 different trees fronting it. So that's a policy question that we would like to answer as to how much the commission would support, how many sites. So I think that's something we're...
So by a site, you don't mean a property, you mean like a tree site, essentially a tree.
How many of those trees where there's 2 sidewalk panels, for instance? Yeah.
Okay.
So you've seen this slide. This is just information that I think Laura and her group pulled together. These are just the 7 jurisdictions that we were able to find had sidewalk assistance programs, and many of them cover sidewalk costs up to 50% or $1,500. So we're asking you, we're not proposing a dollar amount, but I think many of these had that $1,500 maximum. And some of them, we weren't, I understand that to be per property or per applicant, not per site. So that is a difference there. So next slide, please. So again, just trying to provide some details so that folks don't have to do the math. I went through this a couple times, so I hope I got it right, but I'm really trying to show you both the single repair, and by the way, this first scenario is a group scenario, so if there were multiple property owners that got together, I don't necessarily think that has to be a specific number of 20, but I think it's kind of a group that makes sense for a contractor to deal with, right? So they can come in and spend a day or, multiple days on tree removals and another day on, or multiple days on demo, and then do all the sidewalk repair work. But so this would be kind of a group permit scenario, and really just kind of acknowledging that 30% reduction from the two numbers that I presented before. So if it was an individual repair, I use the $1,600 number. I mean, not the individual. If it was just a sidewalk repair, it was $1,600. If it included the tree and the grinding, it was the $2,450. So really just acknowledging the 30% discount for a group permit. And then there's 4 scenarios there. If the commission or the commission's decision to fund 100% of that, you can see the 2 resulting grants. And if they were to propose to cover 40% of that, you would see at the bottom of those 4 scenarios, the costs associated with those 2 options. Next slide, please. And then this is similar, but it represents the same numbers. It's just not showing that 30% discount. So again, gives you an idea of the range that a grant program could include depending on how the commission elects to fund these grants. Next slide. So these are areas where, we can go through these once. There's like 3 policy issue clarification slides that I'd like to go through with you and just get some direction. But I think it'd be good for you to see all of them first, and then we'll go back. So just keep that in mind. So I guess one of the questions I had was, does this policy apply to sidewalks damaged by tree roots only? Or are we talking other kinds of damage? An example that I had in mind was, our downtown, we had an icy year. They put down salt instead of de-icer on the sidewalks, and they damaged a lot of the sidewalks down there. Is that what we're talking about? Or are we trying to be specific with the sidewalk assistance program to tree roots? We're assuming it's specific to tree roots. So I'd like an answer to that. Does the program apply to tree root damage regardless of whether a standard was met or not? If it's just, let's say the developer did everything right at the time of the development, but they're still resulting in sidewalk damage. Is that a consideration that staff need to look to determine whether or not they would be eligible for the grant? Program only applies to applications approved before the work begins, and this is kind of twofold. As we move forward, if a property owner just moves forward with work without getting a permit, to me that seems obvious that this should be after they should get the permit and then do the work. So there's that scenario. There's also, we've got quite a few folks who have done repair work in the past. Is there any look-back provision in this policy, or do we just consider it work from this point forward? Next slide, please. Should the program mandate competitive bids or something more flexible or more convenient for the applicant? If the city's going to pick a dollar amount, what we heard from other agencies was one of the more problematic things, especially that was problematic for both the property owner and the staff who were managing it, was forcing 3 competitive quotes. And like we struggled to get those, property owners were struggling with that as well. So if we're picking a dollar amount, then, and we're saying it's per site, are we okay with that? Or does the policy need to require a certain number of bids? Is the program a one-time fix, or is this an annual program? And by that, I mean the program. I'm almost pretty certain that the commission is talking about something that starts whenever we adopt this, and will be in place probably forever. But maybe there's thinking that, no, this is a short-term fix. We're going to do it for a year or a couple years, and then we're done with it. That would be something that would be helpful to know. Should the grant program include funding for sidewalk grinding? I'll just share my opinion on that, which is sidewalk grinding is an immediate fix, but it's a delay fix as well. So while it has some advantages to it, if the tree is not removed, then sidewalk grinding is really money spent that won't necessarily, it's just a delay, right? So if we have to spend $400 on a sidewalk grinding project for an individual and they don't remove the tree and replace the tree, then, 2, maybe 3 years down the road, depending on really the impact of that particular tree on that particular piece of sidewalk, is going to just be another scenario. Now, I am an advocate for sidewalk grinding because it does delay things. It helps people in certain financial scenarios, et cetera. I'm just questioning whether or not we should be spending city resources on that sidewalk grinding. So that's a question. You may disagree with me, and all we really need is guidance on that. So next slide, please. Biennial, we've got a biennial budget. The budget didn't include this program, so, and really it's somewhat funded, our funding is somewhat limited by source, but based on the past permit history and, kind of where I think we'd be at, I estimated 100 permits, or 100 different sites, I guess I should say, not permits, but 100 different sites, repair locations per year. I also assumed a 50% program contribution, kind of aligned with what other agencies have done. And with that, a biennial 2-year budget would be somewhere around $160,000 to a $250,000 program. So that just gives you a sense of how I came up with the number. There's no real magic to that. Again, I think this is a policy decision and a decision about allocation of funds, so that could change, but that's what I suggested. There's a couple of more policy questions here. What amount should the city limit each individual grant? What amount should the city limit the grant for each property, not site, but property? Is there a number above and beyond what's shown here? And, the last one was one that I was struggling with. We tend to hear about these in the residential neighborhoods, but I know, just being a user of all of our neighborhoods and land use types, that there's other places where we see these problems crop up. So, is the commission interested in keeping this wide open, that it applies to any kind of land use, or is this specific to residential?
Did you have any examples of where this is occurring in non-residential properties?
Well, I think we see it in Main Street as probably my best example. I'm sure there's others, but no, I didn't go around.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't anticipating that you were. I mean, the Main Street thing is, well, that's a whole nother topic, but.
I think that's all I need to say on that one. So, the other thing that I think is, whatever the commission chooses, I'm fairly confident the commission is interested in helping, and there's lots of good in that help. How we fund it is another question, and that's probably more for staff to figure out. I was thinking about this, and it's usually a pretty short arm wrestling competition when the public works director starts talking about the general fund. Tony usually wins that one like hands down, so I usually don't talk much about general fund, but I wanted to mention it because we collect right-of-way fees from our franchise utilities. The utilities pay into that fee as well. So there's that side of it. The other side of it is our transportation funds, gas taxes, for instance. There's specific language in how we use that, and so I kind of wrote that out based on what I read on that was, shall be used for the activities related to construction, reconstruction, improvement, repair, and maintenance of public highways, roads, streets within the city which are subject to city control. The use of pavement maintenance fee is another funding source where both sidewalk repair and street tree funding may have some limits. I attached the ordinance for the pavement maintenance fee, and I was reminded when you probably read that, but it's a transportation utility fee. And I read that because we got some citizen comment about the intent of that funding. And my recollection of that, because I was around when we went through that process, and I sat with that committee, and I remember the commitment to pavement maintenance was high. Everyone on that committee had consensus on that. When the ordinance came together for that, it was written more broadly. And so despite how we've tried to maintain that committee's work and intent, as I read the ordinance, it's not that limiting. So it's not just about pavement maintenance. So that's another source, but I think it has that kind of that overarching consideration that that was the original intent. Kind of like the vehicle registration fee, which was controversial, approved, but remains controversial. But I think the name implies that it was really kind of intended for vehicle-related improvements. So funding, a program designed to rebuild the city's street tree canopy, I don't think it's a problem with the sidewalks. It's more about how do we fund the street tree canopy for me. We would consider it not suitable to use transportation funding. Now, so you just heard me loud and clear kind of say that. I'm going to kind of walk another fine line, which is we build projects, and Malala Avenue, Myers Road, most of our big projects include a lot of either tree removal, but sometimes they include both, right? Tree removal, they almost always have tree plantings that go along with them. We plant a lot of street trees in most of our capital program. And there's no question that funding comes from those transportation funds. So I've spent a lot of time on that, but I'm just kind of acknowledging that it's kind of a question that we think about. We do think about the color of money when we're trying to fund these programs, and maybe you have some thoughts on that. Either way, I'm pretty confident that we could fund a program kind of like what I'm talking about without, if we're going to allocate or reallocate existing revenues, something's going to fall off the plate, but we can work through that for sure. And if not, there's budget amendments, right? We could do a budget amendment to fund that. And my next slide. So simple problem to solve, right? This is an added slide that I will question putting in here, but it just feels very much to me like this problem without the context of how we struggle with these we struggle with trees, right? Our urban canopy question, and what I think the commission's interested in seeing better urban canopy, better treatment of our urban canopy. I alluded to this the other night as well. It just feels to me like, to again, be wise in using public funds to add more street trees and to deal with a lot of the tree problems that we're dealing with, whether it be and all, I know planning, parks, public works, we've got the NRC, we've got the Oregon City Watershed Council, good people who are trying to do good things, along with the staff and the commission on trees. It feels like Oregon City's kind of grown to that point where we really need a program that is focused on urban forestry and an urban management of our forests. And, losing Pete was my kind of last hope as far as someone who had, good knowledge of trees and was trying to do good things with trees. I'm trying to just plant the seed. That's all this is. This has nothing to do with the sidewalk replacement program. It's not an element of the sidewalk repair assistance program. I'm just kind of planting the seed that I think Oregon City is getting ready for or could utilize an urban forester and some kind of an urban forestry program.
I don't disagree with you.
Next slide. And then this is one other little kind of personal piece on this. I've got, I've got a kind of a long-standing viewpoint about street trees, and I struggle with these planter strips. And I know we've gotten much, much better at going with wider planter strips, right tree guards, all those things. But I think the other thing that we need in the toolkit is curb-tight sidewalks. And these two, we've got this dilemma, and you've seen more and more pictures of it. But there's better outcomes. We have some streets with curb-tight sidewalks with mature trees growing right alongside of them, and they're using the space that they have, and they're not impacting the sidewalks and the walkways. So, but right now it's really not a design standard that the city accepts. So, but many cities do, and I think the impression is that those aren't, attractive, and they aren't cities that have shade that helps with the kind of things that we see with stormwater management, those kind of things. And so these other pictures are actually from other agencies that I've experienced and been in, but mature trees that last the real life of the tree, as opposed to an artificial life of the tree that it's going to live. I mean, I think I was at the NRC meeting, and we talked about a street tree having an average life of 17 years. So I just think that's unfortunate, because you end up with the broken sidewalk and you end up with losing 17 years of tree life. So I'd like to open that idea to the commission. Laura and I have talked about it. It is a community-wide conversation, because I think a lot of community conversation may have gone into the idea of planter strips. I just think that there's two sides to that, and we could talk lots of times about the advantages and disadvantages. That's not what this conversation is about. So, but I wanted to plant the seed again. So with that, I've got a question slide and another example of that.
Mr. Lewis, I just want to respond to that last comment, and I think it really depends on where the tree is, because I know in my profession we've looked at planter strips, depending on where it is, as a little bit of a barrier to protect pedestrians. If you're in a residential area and the speed limit, which we have, is 25 miles an hour, you may not need a parking strip to protect a pedestrian, because you're assuming that it's a low-speed street. Now, if you're on Malala Avenue or you're someplace else that's an arterial, I think maybe people think of it as a false sense of security, but at least there's something between you and, that I would not want to be walking on a curb-tight sidewalk on an arterial, just because it's like they're right there and you're right there. So it is a question, but I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think it depends on where that curb-tight sidewalk is.
I agree.
Okay, so I think you have some slides of policy questions.
Oh, yes, we were going to go back. Sorry.
And I think we'll need to go back to those and probably step through those, assuming you want us to provide some guidance to you tonight, right?
That was the hope, and we can use that to return with a more finalized policy or program.
Right.
So let's see,
I like your suggestions.
right? Oh, yeah, you're.
And by the way,
Oh,
just
you
for the
you're going
record,
backwards.
I think that
Sorry.
Mr. Lewis, if you were to arm wrestle Tony for general fund money, I think you'd beat him. So that's, I'll bet on you right now.
No, he's
Keep going.
he doesn't look like much, but man.
Is he scrappy? You're saying he's scrappy?
Yeah, he's scrappy. Right there.
Okay. I think this does beg the question is like, if we're willing to create a program to try to fix this, then the other arm of this conversation needs to be, what is our planning, what is our code, what is our design specification? Because if we're not fixing it on that end, then we're just wasting our time. You know, if we think we got our code and our tree list right, then that's one thing, but, you know, we want to make sure there's no point in, you know, pouring money in a bucket that's got holes in it if the bucket has a bunch of holes in it, if I could use that analogy. So I don't know if the planning department is planning. I keep looking at Ms. Turway. I don't know if that's part of this conversation, that it is on your list of things to consider. Is it part of the comp plan discussions or anything like that? Or
I think it's too specific for comp plan.
Natural resources.
right?
Well, not have projects on the side.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell and Smith, did you hear Ms. Turway?
I heard her.
Okay, I just wanted to check to make sure. All right, so, yes. So I was thinking when we were going through here of how we could generally poll the commission and see where we're at. I kind of feel like we're back into a retreat. We got a couple people virtually, and I've got people in the room here. So I was kind of thinking, Mr. Lewis can ask each question one by one, and generally, I think we know where we're going, or if I need to rephrase the question, I would like everybody to give, particularly Commissioner O'Donnell, and us in the room too, give a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or if you're giving me the sideways thumbs, then that means you want to have a discussion on it, or you need to ask more clarifying questions. But I think we may be in general agreement, and that may be the fastest way to move through these questions to see if we have general policy agreement. Does that make sense? Because you have like 10 questions that we're trying to get through, so. Go back.
I guess generally.
Is that the first slide? I think you just advanced the slides.
You just.
There you go.
There we go. So I guess maybe the first question is, a policy that helps neighbors with sidewalk and street tree repairs, that's, I mean.
That are only damaged by tree roots.
Well,
That's the first question.
But I'm just trying to, are we headed in the right direction, first of all? That's one thing, and then going through these questions,
Okay.
yeah.
So before we go through the policy, the question is, are we generally headed in the right direction of having a tree grant / reimbursement type funding policy for our community? Are you in support of that?
I'm in support.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you for
thumbs up.
that. So then the next question is so for these sidewalk damaged areas, is this program only apply if it's tree root damage?
And your example was like salt being
Right.
applied to sidewalks, but we're only talking about tree damage.
I have a comment to make. So I don't know what we're doing with our hand signals here.
The hand signals are if you.
Yeah, I saw you, but I said depends.
So this is it depends, you have a question.
Yes,
You have
it depends.
a consensus by the thumbs up that it's a yes, but I see Commissioner Smith has his hand up, and go ahead,
Okay.
Commissioner McGriff.
Commissioner Smith, is it okay if I go? Just.
He's muted.
Yeah, I
Go
know
ahead
he is.
and go.
Okay. So my suggestion is that, yes, it should apply to sidewalks damaged by tree roots. And I would like to suggest that we take the 3 subdivisions that have come to us as the initial pilot to, we get to play around with that and see how well things work. We should start there, since we know we have other areas, but we should start there at least at this point. See how we can play it out. We have the opportunity to tweak it as we go along, because not everything's going to be exactly the way these are. So I would like, that's my recommendation, is that yes, we do tree roots. I'm not, at this point in time, if you put salt on your sidewalk, I don't want to be responsible for that.
Okay, so you're jumping ahead with the question regarding, by bringing up the specific neighborhoods. So we're all in agreement that it's just for tree root damage. Commissioner Smith, did you have a question about that?
No, I was just, when we were doing the thumbs up thing, we lost the view to the commission chambers. So when we're doing the thumbs up, the thumbs down, it would be helpful that we saw your thumbs up as well.
Okay. You get that, Jacob? Okay. All right, so the next question, we will return to your suggestion, Commissioner McGriff. I think this one is starting to get to it.
Okay, so the program applies to tree root damage regardless of whether at the time of development, the standards were met.
So the downside to this would be that if it requires standards to be met, then that means staff have to likely do research and see when the trees were put in, when the development was in, and all of that kind of stuff, or do we just want to make a simple program? So the question is the simple program of whether regardless of whether standards were met, thumbs up or thumbs down. All right, we have majority thumbs up, but Commissioner McGriff has questions or comments?
I'm not saying that it's going to make a difference, but again, that was why I was going back to the 3 developments that we have been brought before us. I do want to know whether or not the standard was met, because obviously it's one of those things that I've talked about before, visual inspection. So when the sidewalk was poured and this planter strip was there, was it done according to the standard? And then did the tree that got planted as per the development, which is, you go look at the conditions of approval, they said we're going to plant tree X, Y, or Z, and the planting strip's going to be this. I guess that is one of the questions. It's not going to make a difference to me, but I do want to know that, because I think that is critical to the question of how we got to where we are.
Okay, I think, based on the history on that one and based on my understanding of that one, we'll know, was the planter strip wide enough? We will know, was the right tree planted? What we won't know is, was it planted deep enough? Did they take out enough soil? Are those the 2 questions that you're talking about?
Those are the 2 questions.
Okay, I think we've answered that, but we'll try to clarify.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to hone it down to initially, because we've got documentation of those 3 developments. Now, in front of my house, you're not going to be able to find any of that documentation because, nobody was here in 1844 when the street was platted and the lot was created.
Yeah. So does everybody need an answer to that, or can I get back to Commissioner McGriff on that one?
I'm not sure what you're getting back to her on. I guess I want clarity. Are you saying that you want to know for gathering data purposes?
Yes.
Or are you wanting to know because whether or not we're going to give the applicant money based on whether or not it met the standards? Because I think we're talking about whether or not we're giving them grant or assistance funding based on.
I want to give a grant either way, but I think it would be helpful to know whether it met the standard at the time. Because we don't know the answer to that, at least I don't know the answer to that question.
So that's a question that could be asked as part of the application process. So it
The
sounds,
applicant's not going to know. It's going to involve, unfortunately, going back to that subdivision. So I think what's Trails View or whatever, whichever the one it is, and what was the requirement at the time?
What I'm hearing, I'm just going to repeat it for super clarity. This is not a question that pertains to the policy or the program. This is we want to know
Additional
something
information.
specific about that particular development or those 3 developments.
Right.
And we need to get you that information.
Yes.
And is it safe to assume that Commissioner McGriff is the only one that needs that information, or do I need to bring it back to the commission?
I don't need it. I would like to know it.
Okay.
It will help inform my decision as we go further along.
okay. Okay, so
I can bring
to make
that
sure
back.
we're clear, Mr. Lewis is going to get some information on these particular 3 subdivisions and provide that information just back.
yeah, and I
But
would-
it's not affecting the program.
And I think that the other commissioners would be interested in knowing as well. It's background information to help us make an informed decision.
Okay.
Ms. Turway.
We did do that research, and it was a few months ago, back in May, I believe. So off the top of my head, I know that of the 3 subdivisions we took a look at, 2 of them, I believe one got adopted maybe right before or within the same year that we adopted the street tree list, and I believe the species were perhaps on the list. The other one, the species were all on the list, and the third one, we either had an arborist or a landscape architect, I think it was, sign off on the tree species. So we do know the answer. I'll have to summarize, but off the top of my
Yeah,
head. In
which
general,
development
I
it
think
is.
the process happened appropriately. The guess of what tree was the right fit wasn't right.
Yeah, I guess the other question I would have, which has been asked to me by several constituents, is, what was our process of going back and verifying all of that was correct? Was that a building department issue that they needed to inspect and make sure it was this wide or this tree or whatever, or was that planning, or was it nobody? I don't know.
So how did you gather your data?
We identified the applications and their approvals and the signed approvals for the street trees before they were planted. And then we did have a couple people walk. Pete Walter, a planner with the city, walked with John Lewis along there to take a look at those species to verify the species is correct. In general, our process is when we release surety for street trees, then someone will go through and check, but we're in the process of reviewing that process right now.
Okay.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I pretty much agree with everything that's been said. I just want to say, remember that some of these things occurred before we even had trees specified, and the types of trees evolved. The list has changed. I agree with Commissioner McGriff and others. It does not affect our financial contribution to the program. But knowing, if you find out that you have planted a tree that was approved and it looks like it was planted properly and it still did a lift, we need to know that. So for future planning, I agree with gathering the information, and I don't think it's that difficult. Thanks.
Okay. So, Mr. Lewis, next question.
Next question is, so this one's, I call it the look-back provision. So does the program applies only to applications approved before the work begins? So from the day we adopt, are we saying you applicant must apply before you do the work and get your grant approved? So that's one question. And then there's another one in there that is pretty important to me is this commission interested in trying to make property owners somewhat reimbursed by looking back for those that have already done work? So in this neighborhood in particular that we're talking about, Trailview, and I forget all of them, Wasco and those, there's some repairs that have happened. And so I'm trying to figure out Those two questions.
Yeah.
One, are we looking back and trying to include them in the application process and get, provide them with some grant reimbursement or not?
Okay, so let's take one question at a time. So the first question is, are we looking back and considering, I presume they would have to show receipts or something or some verification of the work that they did if they were trying to submit a request for reimbursement prior to our policy going into effect? Do you support, I'm going to phrase it in, do you support looking backwards in time if sufficient documentation could be provided?
Yes.
How far back?
How far back?
I'm not willing to go back 2 years or something to that effect. I'd be willing to go back to when this situation was brought to our attention. And I have to go back and look at all the letters.
I would think Commissioner Smith could probably, he's heard about this though for like 15 or 20 years, so.
Well, I'm not willing to go back that far.
Commissioner Smith, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, that is my comment. I'm really concerned about the fact that we didn't come up with a policy of the city way back when this started, which was over a decade ago. And I have a concern about making a decision to reimburse some people and saying forget it to all the people that really dealt with this years and years ago, and it's the same problem.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm barely willing to go backwards in time. Normally policies don't do that. Normally policies are always starting and forward looking. I think it's going to be limited if you do go backwards, because they're going to have to produce some type of materials, and most people probably didn't keep receipts on removing a tree probably 5 or 10 years ago. So
I will be honest with you, I probably have mine.
Commissioner
I'm just talking
O'Donnell.
about me personally.
I agree with Commissioner Smith and the mayor. I feel many of these people responded to a code complaint, responding to potential enforcement against them. So they did it. They did it either as good citizens or they did it out of fear of a fine or code complaint. I think we may have to set some time limit on it, but I think we need to go back some amount of time. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's, I don't know. That's a discussion point.
Yeah, I don't mind leaving it open if they can
I don't
provide
either.
documentation.
I don't either. What I don't want to do is go back, and we can discuss it later. So I'm going to use myself as an example. I had a tree that was causing some problems with my sidewalk. It was a tree that I personally planted, but because of the fact that I had a historic wall, I made the decision to remove the tree, repair the sidewalk, so I did not have to repair the retaining wall, which is holding up most of my property. So I was proactive about it and basically took care of the situation. Now, obviously, everybody's not me, but I was not working for the city at the time. I was not on the planning commission. I was not on this position. I think what I'm thinking about is the people in the subdivision that we have had brought to our attention right now who were proactive and wanted to get the work done. I'm not sure about fear of reprisal, as Commissioner O'Donnell said, but there are some people that probably felt that way. So we do need to talk about it. I don't know what the number is. We'll have to figure that out.
I think the direction is you can put it in there. This is an item that's probably going to be discussed a little bit further. Particularly, yeah, I'm not sure about this one. I understand what you're saying, but there's plenty of other neighborhoods and other residents all the way across the city that are dealing with this issue. And I can't, not in good conscience, especially with all of our DEI work, say I'm going to call out one particular neighborhood and put them on a pedestal and give them something that I can't give anybody in the other neighborhoods. So I have to be really careful about that. Commissioner O'Donnell, do you have a question or comment?
Just a comment that I think we should remember that initially the program's going to require more financing, but over time, the amount of financing will go down because we should put in a program where as the tree starts to lift, we take a preemptive action, at which point all we're doing is replacing a tree and not a sidewalk. So the initial outlay will be higher, and then it will go down over time.
Okay, so your other question was whether or not the program applied only to applications if they were approved before the work begins. So this would be going forward, right? They would put in an application, and the question is, do they have to have the application approved in order to participate in the program? I see 3 thumbs up. And I'll provide some discussion. I'm giving the thumbs up only because I feel like that's how all of our other programs work, that any of our permitting, everything else that we do, you essentially sign up, show interest, fill out paperwork, apply for a permit, and then you move forward. I'm not sure why we would change that standard. Commissioner Smith?
What about people that have already done it? I mean, that's what we're asking, right?
No, we answered that already, I believe.
Well, hopefully they got a permit.
Yeah, that would be, those would be the, we're talking about the applications going
Right,
forward once we pass the
So the first
policy.
question was, would we look back? I think just thinking about the look back of those that have done it in the past, seems like they'd have had to get a permit. That had been part of their paper documentation. So, just looking back to 2019, we had 50, 72, that's 100. So, we had like 160 permits. So, there's maybe 160 potential people that could come back. So that's one question, and I think we'll bring back a proposal for that. It's saying now that we have a program adopted, the rules we think should be that you can apply for a grant and get the grant, but you can only do that if you do the work after you get the application approved. If you go out and do the work and then come and ask for a grant, you shouldn't get that grant.
What about if they got a permit and they proceeded with work with a permit? You said you've got about 160 from 2019.
Yeah, but let's forget about the past on those.
We're talking about
going to deal
moving
with those
forward.
differently. Now we're talking about let's say the Trailview, the folks that are waiting for this program.
Yes, they should get a permit.
That's kind of what we're thinking too. A permit and then do the work.
Yeah. Commissioner O'Donnell?
I think the advantage, I agree with requiring a permit. Here's the advantage of that. If you take Mr. Lewis's summary of the cost efficiencies we can realize, the 30% savings versus the potential exposure we're supposed to incur, we could actually realize a $40,000 to $80,000 savings at 30% if we have a permit and we actually give preference or encourage group contracting. And we could even, at that kind of savings, you could assign somebody part-time to kind of manage that program, to put it together. So I agree with the permit for any number of reasons, specifically the savings and the ability to manage the program, almost centralize it.
Right.
I'm not trying to grow government, but I think this would be a good way to do it.
Right. The permit process would allow the city to kind of group them and get discounts, right? As some part of the program could be that.
Yeah, at some point, the city's going to have to put together a list of capable vendors. I mean, I realize that at some point there's going to be a market demand for combined tree removal and sidewalk repair. And let me tell you, some vendors will fill that gap. And the city needs to, rather than have individual homeowners try to locate these people, publish a list of these and, centralize the request so that we can put it together and realize these savings, which will help us manage the program.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm glad you said that, because what I want to suggest is that we put out a request for qualifications and have a list of people, not that we're saying this person's better than this person, but here's a list of qualified people. They're licensed and bonded. They have a city business license, because I don't know how many times I've been out working in my yard and somebody drives by in a pickup and says, oh, would you like me to do this work? And I said, well, yeah, do you have a business license? Are you licensed and bonded? And that's when they get back in their truck and they drive away. I don't want people to get somebody on the fly-by-night unless it's, unless their brother-in-law's in construction or something like that. But I want people to understand that we are trying to help them by grouping together some contractors, tree, stump grinders, concrete people or whatever, and it's real simple. If they want to respond, they'll respond, and we have a short list, and say, here's some contractors, we've vetted them, we can get some group discounts, and that would be a little incentive for them to say, hey, if you want to be on our list, we'll help you get group discount, we'd like a group discount for these 20 people or whatever. I just think it's, having been a project manager for many projects, not only professionally but personally, it is a grind to be on the phone and calling down lists of contractors and hoping to God somebody gets back to you. And, and that was before COVID. After now, it's even worse than that.
Right.
Just, we can bring back those kind of alternatives. Just keep in mind, we are trying to do this within
Minimal
our
staff,
existing
I understand.
processes. We're trying to streamline this because I didn't anticipate this commission approving additional staff to augment this program, with the exception of the idea of the forester, but this kind of doesn't lend itself to that. So, there's lots of things that are going on in my head when you start talking about vetting contractors that do this kind of work, because they're not your typical contractors that have much more than a contractor's license usually.
Well, if they've got a Metro license, if I can provide any assistance with that, I'm happy to do it. I'm trying to help us be proactive to not only be positive about this, but help the homeowners. Like I said, I've been through this myself, and as some of you know, I'm still going through the tree falling on your house issue and trying to get people to help me manage that, contractors. It's not easy, and I have knowledge. I'm just thinking about Joe Schmo here in Trails View, who's, doesn't really do this.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure why we couldn't do a single RFQ and get a list of qualified, we're going to need it anyway, especially if we're doing the group permits and trying to manage that anyway. I don't.
Well, we wouldn't be managing any of this work. It would be up to the property owners to manage.
Yeah, we're not managing. We're just going to be able to give them the list and say, here, we know these people are license bonded. You can call them, and, if you can get a group discount, get 20 of your neighbors together.
Okay, I think I understand.
Okay, so let's move on. You have at least 2 more slides of policy questions.
Again, back to competitive bids or not. So this one's recognizing that most property owners are going to try, but if when that becomes more problematic than what they're willing to put up with, since we've already kind of got an understanding of project costs, are we asking for competitive bids or not? From the agencies we talked to, that's been their biggest hassle to administer these programs, both for the staff and for the property owners.
So I'm not sure that we would want to mandate that. So you're essentially saying we would mandate the applicants as part of the application process to go out and get 3 quotes and then provide those quotes to us as part of the permit and the grant request for funds.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I don't think I support that either. Although, and that comes back to that RFP or request for qualifications, that is a normal process for a city. You guys you do this all of the time, come up with a list of qualified vendors, if we were really going to do this program, we would have a set of qualified vendors. We would know generally a price cost estimate, see if we could negotiate some cost per tree grinding, you know what I mean? Like root repair, so I'm not sure why. Granted, I know that's setting up maybe a bigger program than what you were hoping or had anticipated, but I think that's what would be most helpful for our neighbors, instead of requiring each and every individual house to go and try to get competitive bids. And in this market, it's practically.
I think the right way to do that would be to have the neighborhoods get together, coordinate, call for quotes, get those bids, and then and then just propose to us, we want to do this work, have their contractor
Yeah.
propose to us to get the permit to do that.
Yeah.
That's
And
kind of how
then
we're
you're
hoping.
relying on our neighborhoods, and we already have a planning program who's relying on our neighborhoods or using our neighborhoods to function as part of the land use process, and it has serious problems with it. That's some of the biggest complaints that I've heard about in the last month. And so I'm really challenged with thinking that even our neighborhood association chairs are being tasked with wrangling everybody in their neighborhood to try to come up with,
I didn't mean our neighborhood associations. I meant
you mean just a
the
neighborhood.
neighborhood community. Oftentimes what happens, has happened before I moved to Oregon City, it happened in my neighborhood, where a couple of key stakeholders in the neighborhood, they may not even attend the neighborhood meetings, but they know enough community members to gather them together and say, hey, let's do a group project. And usually that's the most effective way of getting it there done.
I agree with you. Most of these neighborhoods, at least the 3 that I'm thinking of, have HOAs. We give them a list saying, here's some vendors that you can use. You guys can do the rest of the work.
So Commissioner O'Donnell, I saw your hand go up, and it's now down. Did you change your mind?
Oh, I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, I saw where Mr. Giles submitted a list of 42 locations that need this. If the city provides a list of vendors and somebody gives that list to those vendors and they come back with a breakdown, I don't know how hard is that to say, this is what we seem to be assigning what I feel is a city function to their HOAs, but I'm willing to go either way. If these people if the homeowner wants to participate in a program where we're going to bear some of the financial program, they need to be participants. So I'm good either way. I just don't want to shirk our responsibility. We're talking about that 30% savings by virtue of consolidating these bids. So I'll go to the will of the commission, whether the homeowners do it, but we definitely provide them with a list of vendors, and I don't care if they contact them and come back with and I agree with paying up the lowest quote. If they want somebody in excess of what we get, then maybe they can bear that additional cost themselves. The other thing I want to make a point of before we forget, if the repairs were done and the people have since moved out of the area, it's a new homeowner, I don't think that's an eligible site. Thanks.
Say that last one
I
again.
didn't get that either.
The last one is, if I've repaired this, say 2 years ago, and I've since sold my home and moved, that site is not, that repair is not eligible for this program. It's a new ownership, and they haven't borne any of that cost. Do you understand that?
Oh, yeah. So he's basically saying one property owner paid the bill and then sold his property, and then that new property owner comes and tries to collect on that. So that he's saying
That doesn't happen.
that's a problem. And I think I understand that. I think
So the
I'm hearing
question,
kind of loud and clear. I just want to remind everybody that, again, your code stipulates that these property owners are responsible for this. This program is about a funding program. It's not really about a project management program. That's a different program. If that's what you're asking for, then
I am
need to
not
do that
asking
loud
for a
and clear.
project management program.
you're asking for a
Yet.
project management program.
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're not?
No, I
Good.
said I am not asking for a project management program. I'm asking for a little help to help people navigate some of this
Okay.
contractor issue, because again, I know how to do it. It's not fun. I can't imagine somebody who doesn't know how to do it trying to get through it.
Okay.
So that's what
A
I'm
list
saying.
of qualified contractors is what I'm taking
Yes.
away.
So licensed, bonded, Metro license, whatever license they're supposed to have, and they need to have an Oregon City business license, and, so that anything happens, and let them vet them. We can just say, here's this list for concrete work, stump grinding, root barriers, whatever. If they need tree bags, I don't know,
I heard on the competitive bids, more flexibility is good.
Yes.
yes.
Okay. And what I also heard, well, I don't know that I heard, this is an annual program, right? Do we have consensus? This is kind of, from this point forward, we're doing it. Maybe we pay less, or maybe those costs drop off because we've done some things right, but you're talking about, this is an annual program that
Yes.
you're going to see in your budget from this point forward.
Yes.
Yes. The question, do we want an annual program?
I'd say right now, I'd say tentatively
Yes.
yes.
You have at least 4 thumbs up. All right.
Okay. And then, should the sidewalk program include funding for sidewalk grinding?
So I felt like you gave like a couple of scenarios of why you wouldn't support sidewalk grinding. I think there's a scenario in which maybe you would support sidewalk grinding, and that would be if the tree's already been, the problematic tree has already been removed, and sidewalk grinding is the solution. Is that if that's the only thing that's needed to repair the sidewalk, is that a viable option?
So if they are proactive about it and they see that sidewalk is lifting, but yet just a 1/4 inch or whatever, then then they could remove the tree, do whatever stump grinding they need to do, grind the sidewalk, and either choose to replace a tree at that location or find another location.
Okay, let me take a little bit exception to that. We've had several situations in the McLaughlin neighborhood where that's all it needed was a small grind to take the sidewalk down, and the whole tree got taken out. So I want it to be on a case-by-case basis if they need the grinding, because sometimes that will solve the problem. Other times, I agree with you, it is not going to solve the problem, but I don't want to immediately say, okay, whoop, it's lifted this much, the tree's gone. Those cases, I think, have to be looked at.
So is that an option of sidewalk grinding could be included for funding with prior approval?
Right.
Review and approval? I see a thumbs up from Commissioner O'Donnell.
How are we going to approve a growing, living tree and make a finding that it's never going to make the sidewalk come up again? It's not feasible, I don't believe.
Well, I'm going to reverse that and say, let's try to be proactive first before we be yanking out all these trees.
I think what John was saying, though, is, okay, that's fine. If we want to pay $400 to grind it and see what happens in a year or 2 or 5, and then have the homeowner come back because in that situation it lifted it again, are we going to grind it again, or we get to the point where we can't grind it, so now we're going to remove, and are we going to pay for that again?
Right.
Really, it's, do we want to spend the money twice, or do we just want to spend it once?
Okay, let me make the suggestion of, this is one of those questions where I'm going to need some more information. I'm not asking you to get it for me. I know a number of people who are tree specialists. I will do some investigation on my own, and I'll just say, for answer to this question, it depends until I get that information. I can do that within the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I'm actually going to agree with Commissioner McGriff. I think that if you take a really mature tree, at one point maybe the root doesn't increase in diameter anymore, so whatever damage is there is stabilized, and that's going to be an opinion of an arborist. On a younger tree that's just now making incursions into the sidewalk and in search of water, I think the root grinding is not going to be a very good solution. So let's get some professional input on that, but I'm not all in favor of knocking down 60-year-old trees. I'm willing to risk that smaller expenditure to see what our outcome is. If it proves it doesn't work, we'll abandon that practice.
Well, the other option is to not include it in the grant program, because if you just want to do a sidewalk grinding, if it's $400, that may be an expense the homeowner's willing to do to prolong the issue or decide whether or not they want to invest. Because I think even with this grant program, they're still going to have to invest, probably come to the table with a couple $1,000s, likely to, if the city's a 50-50 or something like that. So.
Well, kind of what I'm hearing is that you need a qualified determination on whether or not that tree's going to, and that's going to require an arborist.
Right.
I think my thought on this was, sidewalk grinding is a tool, but should it be part of this grant funding program? Because if everybody could solve their problems with sidewalk grinding, I don't think we'd be here.
It depends.
Larger, it's just this larger expense associated with tearing out a tree, tearing out a sidewalk, putting it all back and replanting. That's the bigger problem. I'm not saying that sidewalk grinding doesn't work in some areas. It's just, should it apply under this program? My recommendation is no, but I'm just the staff.
I'm just saying it depends. I'd like to get a little more information, so put a question mark
Commissioner O'Donnell?
and put that in the parking lot.
If you take sidewalk grinding out as an option, you immediately have to go to the option of tree removal and panel replacement. So I would leave it in.
Right. All right, that one's going to have a question mark on it for now. Do you have another slide?
Yeah, sorry. It's really trying to figure out, we need to get to the, what kind of allocation, budget allocation is this commission thinking about? And then, are we limiting the program dollar-wise per each individual grant?
How much money can Mr. Zook and you arm wrestle for? I don't know. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at the budget, see where there's any. It's tight budget, as we know. We approved a very tight budget, so I can't answer that question because I don't know.
Yeah.
Fair. When I looked at this $250,000 number, that's a lot of kind of permits to administer as well, right? So again, trying to do this with our existing staff. And with that number, depending on what pot we pull it from, it's likely going to kick other things off the list. And so I just think we need to be ready for that. There is a slide there that shows contingency. We've got about $1 million contingency in our transportation fund.
So in the interest of time, is it possible for us to move on and?
Yes.
And, I think the money questions, maybe that can be taken all in one, our next session where we talk about this, about limits and the 50% and where it's going to come from and how much. The last question you have on there is not a money question, it is a policy question. So I want to ask it and then maybe we could move on. Would all land use qualify for the grant program? So this is asking, we're talking about residential, or here's the question. I'll state it as a statement so that you can give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. This program will allow residential and non-residential customers to qualify for the grant program. Do you support that?
I only support it for residential at this point in time.
I saw 3 thumbs up, and Commissioner O'Donnell has not weighed in. 4 thumbs up. So the majority is to include residential and non-residential.
Okay.
I think that's all your general policy questions outside of the money items, right?
Yep. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lewis. Commissioner O'Donnell, do you have a hand?
It was just my thought that our annual budget is $120 million. It'd be easier for us as a city to find money than it will be for a household that may make as little as $30,000 a year up to what's supposedly our median income of in the 70s. So I think we can find the money if we need to. We found it for other less noble projects. That's all I got to say. Thanks.
I want to thank the staff for being very proactive on this because I think this is important. It shows that we are paying attention, but, I don't want people to misunderstand that it's kind of the whole squeaky wheel thing. This is an issue. We do have some tripping hazards. There are a variety of options that are out there. I think you've identified a great many of them, and I think I'm very appreciative of that. I'm appreciative of the proactive way that you're going about trying to solve this problem. And, again, as I said, I'm waiting for the, I'm going to take bets on the arm wrestling thing here because, you're my champion right now. So sorry, Tony.
All right, so our next items on the agenda are regarding the Parks and Recreation Department. Item 2 and number 3.
I am going to take a brief break.
We're going to
like 5
request that we do number 3 first because we have a consultant here for that topic.
Okay, why don't we take a 5-minute break? We'll let staff get ready, and we'll go to the restrooms or whatever break you want.
Yeah.
5 minutes. All right, so I'm calling this work session back to order. And we are on discussion item number 2, Oregon City Parks and Recreation Financial Support and Sustainability Strategy Policy. Mr. Reed. Oh, yes, you did ask for that. I can't hardly understand you with.
Closer because it's,
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Yeah, we're going to start with number 3 because we have a consultant here to provide that presentation.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll introduce. So the Parks and Recreation Department received approval to move forward in the process of hiring a consultant to do a deferred maintenance assessment and capital improvement plan for our parks and facilities. On January 28th, we selected Bureau Veritas Technical Assessments, LLC, to help us develop a plan to address the need for immediate repairs, preventative maintenance, deferred project backlog, and capital replacement. Tonight, we have Matt Anderson from BVTA here to present the results of that assessment. We also have Denise Conrad, our Assistant Parks and Recreation Director, on Zoom to assist with answering any of your questions. Matt?
Yeah. Thank you. And there's a slide presentation that we'll start here. But I wanted to thank also the staff. They were very helpful in this entire process to get us into the parks, around them, talk about how they're used and the problems that they knew about. So it's really us, but the staff was, helped greatly with this process. And what we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit about our company, why we were hired, how we approach this type of work, and then talk about dollars and the type of information that we found and sort of what the next steps would be for people that are evaluating the information. In terms of our company, we're located around the country, and then in other countries, it's actually a French company headquarters, but we're individually owned in this country. But we're based on the West Coast, and we have staff from the Seattle, Portland, and California areas. We work with not just existing buildings, but environmental studies of buildings, wheelchair accessibility, various things all around buildings, including looking at whether you should retain a building or not retain it based on the amount of repairs or the condition. These are the parks we looked at, and we looked at the parks, the buildings that are within the parks, and the areas around them that affect how the parks are used or what the conditions of the parks are. And there's a separate list. I know it's difficult to read. It's probably easier to read in your staff handout, but the listing of the parks and the listing of the buildings within the parks. And we did separate those. Everything is in a cost database, and so you can look up just the building costs or just the park costs and look at how those are budgeted separately if you desire to look at it that way. And I should say, if you have questions, please ask as I'm going through this. This doesn't have to be linear. I don't have to talk for half an hour and then go back to questions. If you have one, I can't really see if thumbs are raised on the screen, but if you can interrupt me if you do see one from our commissioners that are looking at Zoom. But you can feel free to ask questions. A little bit about how we worked is we did walk around and do a visual assessment. We were not tearing apart walls and looking inside them. We were not tearing apart ceilings or disturbing the buildings. It was a visual assessment, but we did use photographs. We take an iPad with us and we put documentation into that iPad, so it's a database to collect the information, and city staff has access to that database going forward. So they can also run additional reports or add more buildings or work however that they need to work with the data. We have gone through a cost estimating process that includes information that we have on the cost of things in your community. That we've talked to the staff about what you've been spending lately on things, and costs have been changing a lot over the last year. The costs have gone up and down, and it's been somewhat of a roller coaster, but we do update that database on a yearly basis with costs. So if you look at it 9 months from now, it will have different costs than it has currently because we're taking into account inflation and other cost changes. And really what goes into this is not just how old something is, but we take a look at the amount of maintenance, what would be the remaining useful life of an item, whether it's carpeting or an air conditioning unit or an irrigation system, and we make an estimate about when something needs to be replaced, so that staff can start to plan for budgeting on normal replacements. We also look at the current condition, and is something wrong now? Is it so worn out that it might need to be replaced in a year or two? And this can give you an idea of what's going to come up in the next few years, not just the current problems, so that if there's a big ticket item, you can budget for that. But it is based on industry standards. You expect the carpet to last 7 to 10 years. You expect the air conditioning units to last 15 or 20, and then it's based on what we saw in the field as we walked around. The terms that, as you're reading through the reports, the expected useful life is an industry standard for how long something should last. The effective age is our interpretation or our opinion of what is the current age of this, not related to the number of months or years it's been installed, but its current condition. And is it close to needing to be replaced? Does it have 1 or 2 or 10 years remaining useful life? And that's important because that dictates when your staff should start to plan for replacements or when you should budget for future replacements if you're doing a 5-year look ahead, something like that. We do have a reserve table, which would be a long-term look ahead. We have immediate repairs, which in our terminology, the word immediate means 12 months. It's not, you need to do it tomorrow, but you need to plan for it over the next 12 months. And then short-term repairs are things to do in the next 2 to 3 years so that you need to get them into your budget, but it doesn't have to be done today. And it may be possible in some cases to do a repair or reconditioning to put off that replacement. And so some of these items, we're taking a worst case scenario, looking at it of 2 and 3 years, but your maintenance department or the parks department may be able to do a repair or recondition to make it last a few years longer. So this is a typical immediate repairs report, and we'll in a few minutes talk about more detailed, but this immediate repairs report just shows that you see a quantity, you see the where it is, which park, which building, and it gives you an indication of what current repairs are needed at buildings and what should you be planning for. We also divide the work out as a systems expenditure report, which is looking at the information the other way and saying, well, from a roofing standpoint or an exterior facade standpoint, what should be replaced? And these tables can be produced for the whole city, parks in one area. Again, it's a database, and you can go in and get the information that you need either on an individual park basis or combining parks. And then the darker the color, the higher the cost on this table, just as a way of drawing your attention to things that are a bigger problem. And in this table here, the short-term repair, the darker blue for site development, would key you into that being a major repair for this table. And then we also look at what we call a plan type. And that's really the reason why you're making the repair. And plan types would include performance integrity, which is something that's broken, or it could include safety. And now in this table, we're not seeing anything on safety because those have been taken care of as they came up. But we do also have life cycle plans or modernization, where park staff is saying, this is really the wrong equipment for what we're using or how we're using the park, and so we should modernize it rather than replacing what's there now.
Okay, can you pause for a second?
Sure.
Commissioner O'Donnell, you have a question?
On the previous slide, were all those expenditures to maintain the facility at the current level of service and not for future use, other than maybe site development is for future
Well, they're
expanded use?
yeah, they would be what's required to keep the building in good condition. And good condition can mean that there's a little bit of repairs that are needed, but not a lot. And there's a standard that we'll talk about in a minute for what's good condition or not. But these are really expenses to keep it in good condition, keep it operating in its current state. It's not for a future plan to turn a park in or add a new playground, or it's not to
That answers the question.
yeah, it's not to add a skateboard park to a park that doesn't currently have one.
Okay, and the next slide you went to, a quick question on that.
Sure.
So now we start talking about modernization, adaptation. Is that to increase our service level or maintain the current service level with improved equipment?
That would be the current service level with improved equipment. Whether
Okay,
it's
thank you.
more energy efficient, more water efficient, there's various, or even there's some really old metal swing sets that could be replaced with newer, brightly colored swings that are plastic and.
They can't.
Well.
Okay, thanks.
And then, as I said, we have a replacement reserve table that you can either prepare these, and this one is an example of costs at a very detailed level in terms of replacing a sidewalk, replacing a playground, a piece of playground equipment, and the database can be set up so you can see these costs over 20 years for an individual park or each table for one park, so you can see what needs to be spent in that park location. And then earlier you were asking about, good condition. The industry standard is that the repair needs divided by the building replacement value should be less than 5% of that value. So if we've looked at current needs and it's $100,000 and your park or your building is worth $1 million, that's 10%. That means you don't have a good condition building if you've got $100,000 needed for that building. So it's a way of looking at that FCI percentage, and we have those on tables for all of the buildings. It doesn't really work for parks because there's not really, you don't replace the land. The land is just there. And so you can provide FCIs for individual buildings, but not for the land that's at the parks. So in terms of individual finances, sure, yes.
Under that model, $1 million building that needs $100,000 in retrofitting, does your model say you replace the building in its entirety?
No, not with $100,000. If it was more like $300,000, you get up to 30% repairs.
Okay.
That's when you start to need to have a discussion about should we repair it or not. And if it's up to 60 or 65, then yeah, you better do something quickly because it either needs to be repaired or replaced. And I don't believe any of your buildings are currently at that stage. So it's not something, but it is the potential, if repairs and money's not spent, you could be at that point in 5 years from now.
Mr. Wiley, could you flip the participants to the side for this slide so I can see what the rest of it says?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. I wasn't sure what that, I saw excellent too, and then I couldn't read the rest of it, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, again, this is an industry standard that was developed by the federal government. You can, adopt a different standard. Some clients, take a look at it and say, well, the buildings used by the public, we don't want the FCI to be more than 2.5%. Buildings that are not used by the public that are support buildings could be 7%, and so you have some flexibility there. It's just a guideline and a national standard that was developed. So in terms of the individual reporting, there's a table. These are what we're seeing as immediate repairs for the next 12 months for each of the parks that we reviewed. And again, all this information is in a database that staff has access to. There are individual PDF reports for each park that are available. But this shows you some parks have very little. Some parks, you can see there's the McLaughlin Park and there's a couple of them that do have more than $100,000 in repairs that should be accomplished over the next 12 months.
What's the difference between the end of the Oregon Trail site and the EOT site? Because they're kind of,
That's what I was wondering,
they're the
too.
same thing. EOT stands for end of the Oregon Trail, I presume.
Trail, yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, that is
That was something that we did is we did separate out some of those buildings and break it out. The other thing that we did with end of the Oregon Trail is we separated out the park aspect of that property versus the building. So
You're talking about grounds versus building?
Yeah.
Okay,
Right, and so
maybe that could
that's-
be like in a parentheses or something to make it clearer.
We could, yes, because that site area is there's some costs right around the buildings, as opposed to out in the landscaped areas farther away from the buildings.
Yeah, because I saw another report where there's almost a $500,000 expenditure for the end of the Oregon Trail, which I presume had to do with the buildings themselves.
Yes, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but there are definitely some siding and caulking problems at the structures there at that park. And again, that's why we divided this out. They can be combined back together in reports or separated out.
I think separate is good.
Ask another question. So I wanted to clarify my comment. So as you are aware, we are a very historic community. And there has been a big debate over time about plastic playground equipment versus the metal. So if you looked at the library park, there is metal equipment there. I can tell you as former neighborhood chair, that was a huge debate in our historic neighborhood. So I would just be cautious about suggesting replacement, things like that, because it's going to be it's a community thing. Some people are totally pro plastic furniture, other people are not. I know that when I was over at the park, Hillendale, they both get warm, but that plastic playground equipment did not cool down in any sense of the form. I mean, it just was super hot. But so we also have some, the Strait Cemetery obviously is historic. We've just got a lot of history in a lot of these parks, and so sometimes material replacement maybe is more critical than what your industry standard is, and I'm just hoping that you're putting in some flexibility in this report to accommodate those things that the community values, as opposed to this is what the industry does. We're like the oldest town in the state, so that's what I was getting at.
Yes, and we definitely have historic costs where that are more expensive. For wood windows, not switching to aluminum because you want to keep the wood windows because that's the historic character of the building or of a park. So we are aware of the historic the historic parks you have and to keep them that way.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate one time again that the title of the Richard Bloom Tots Park is the apostrophe is still in the wrong place. It makes it sound like the Tots own the park, and it's on the sign, and it's been a point of contention for the last 10 years.
Yes, we can change that, yes.
Well, yeah, that's easy, but we got to fix the sign. I brought it to Pam's attention. I said, the apostrophe's not supposed to be there, so.
Then just, again, as I said, we have also a systems expenditure report for the parks, and it shows, again, there's some costs that are, immediate for the next 12 months. They're short-term all the way out to 20 years, so that you can do some long-range planning or at least look at the impact of costs. And again, this is just for the parks, so you're not seeing a lot of fire alarm costs because you only have a few buildings that are in this grouping. But again, it gives you and the staff a way to look at the buildings just a little bit differently. And as you were talking earlier on the sidewalks, you do have the option of doing a roofing contract that would be more than one park. And so with this database, you can take a look at, search through the database for all the roofing costs or all the paving costs and combine parks and have the information there about which parks might need paving repairs in the next 3 years. And you can combine them together to get, as I said, a discount because you're doing larger quantities. And then, as I said, the parks for the plan types, there is one safety repair that we recommended that I think is, again, it's a sidewalk with a tripping hazard. And we consider that a safety issue because there's some liability to the city. Most of the costs are life cycle replacement, which is just the regular replacement. There are some modernization costs and some items that are failing or that the maintenance staff is band-aiding together to keep them operating, where you'd need to you should really spend money to replace the equipment so that you don't have to spend the staff time on the constant repairs.
Where's the sidewalk safety repair?
Oh, I would have to look back.
You know, Kendall?
Yeah. And I know that we were doing this work in the spring. It may be that that no longer exists. And again, this is a snapshot in time from April, and the maintenance staff was there with us, and this may have been already corrected, so it may not be there anymore. And then from a replacement reserve standpoint, there's a chart that identifies costs for the parks over the next 20 years. And again, this is the farther out you go, the more of an estimate it is, because we're basing it on the current level of maintenance that we're seeing or the current conditions. And as time passes, it's not as accurate, but the next couple of years is very accurate. And this does take into account inflation at about 3% a year. So that we're taking into account some inflation, and the database can be modified. If your crystal ball says inflation is going to be 5% or 4%, that can be changed. And you can see what effect that has over the next 20 years.
Dollars for that.
So is this just a breakdown of the gray as a life cycle replacement of stuff in the parks? Is that what this is?
It would be the life cycle, except for the first couple of years. It's the immediate repairs or short-term that we're seeing, but it's everything that we see as an asset that would need to be replaced or significantly upgraded in the next 20 years.
Everything that's not a facility? It's not a building?
Correct. Right now, this is just for parks, yes. Although there's some small restroom buildings, and for the purpose of this study, those go with the park because they're not really separate buildings. They may only be a couple hundred square feet. So the small restroom buildings are included as a park, and the larger air-conditioned and like the end of the Oregon Trail interpretive center buildings, those are separate. And then this is the second 10. This first list was 1 to 10, and this is 11 to 20 years, just because they don't fit well on a slide like this to, in terms of a presentation.
I have another question. I think you mean McLaughlin Park, not the McLaughlin House. The McLaughlin House is owned by the Park Service. They manage and maintain the house itself, but the land around it is a city park that they have a, $1 love and affection for 99 years or something like that. So it shouldn't be the McLaughlin House. You're probably talking about McLaughlin Park.
Yes, it would be McLaughlin Park.
Yeah. Because I thought, why are we spending any money on, we aren't, but it's zeroed out, but yeah.
Okay, and then in terms of the buildings that we mentioned, there's a list at the top there. There's 6 or 7 buildings that we separated out because they're so different from the rest of the parks. I know that everybody's faces are blocking that right now, so, but it's, there are 7 buildings that we treated separately in terms of the way the database is organized. And again, staff and ourselves, we have the total cost, but this is a different way of looking at it because the buildings and parks, just from talking to staff, they wanted to separate them out that way. And we have, some buildings have immediate repairs, especially the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center building. There are some siding problems there that have been getting worse and will be significant to repair in terms of the siding replacement.
So I'm almost afraid to ask, but how did you look at the Buena Vista House and come up with a facility cost on that? Can you characterize what you did in order to come up for a cost? You didn't present any costs on the spreadsheet. You just listed it.
Oh, it's listed. It's listed in this report as well. I think over the about $162,000 worth of maintenance that needs to be done to that property. With the caveat for that house in particular, that's like for like. It doesn't account for any kind of upgrades that we would have to do in regards to getting that building up to code. And the other aspect, it doesn't include any of the soft costs associated with getting Buena Vista House where it needs to be as well.
Just kind of keeping it as is? Okay. I saw Commissioner Smith's hand first, and then I think Commissioner O'Donnell. Commissioner Smith?
My question is regarding, End of Oregon Trail. I'm assuming that the separation of the three buildings, the three wagon buildings, and then Henderson's Farm, which is the building behind the wagons, there's actually an office separate from the Henderson Farm, but I think those two buildings are together. And then separate from that is the actual visitor center, and I'm not sure if the visitor center was looked at in the buildings as well.
Yeah, the visitor center was looked at, but I don't think we have immediate repairs at that building. That's why, because right now we're just looking at an immediate repair list.
Right.
And I think that the wagons are where you have the siding problem, and that's where we're seeing the largest problem in terms of replacements or dealing with what's there to make repairs.
So I guess more specifically, I'd like to know the separation of the Henderson Farm, because the Henderson Farm is where they do the living history stuff in that building, and that's a newer construction compared to the actual office that the End of Oregon Trail actually uses as an office, which that building I know is in really bad shape. So are those two connected?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the visitor center, that's separate, but there's basically a separate office space that you enter from behind the restrooms and behind the Henderson Farm.
Yeah, the visitor center we did look at separately. I'm looking at our cost tables here now, and there are no immediate repairs at the visitor center.
I know that. I'm separating that. What I'm saying is Henderson Farm is a reference to a building that they do living history at. Attached to that building is another building that's not listed here, where the actual End of the Oregon Trail offices are. That building I have concerns about. Was that building looked at?
I'm pretty sure
Yes.
all the buildings were looked at in this report. We do have a more detailed report that looks at all of those sites that will give you more detail. But all those buildings were reviewed in this process.
Yes, and we actually have showing 4 different buildings at the End of the Oregon Trail. We have the farm area, the wagons, the restroom building, and then the visitor center building. And I believe that visitor center includes the offices that you're talking about.
The
offices are in the back.
And and that building was constructed way earlier, and so I'm trying to separate that from what you've listed here, because that building has major issues. I know it does, and has for a long time. And I don't see it referenced here at all. So I'm just trying to figure out where that's accounted for.
Okay, well, and again, I can work with staff on that to make sure that we've got all of that information in the report and to identify, because I know that within our individual report, we have a site plan that lists each of the buildings as was reviewed.
I'll find it later.
Kendall, do you have anything else to add?
And what I can do is I can provide those individual site plans to the city commissioners so they can see the detail associated with those.
Okay. Commissioner Smith and O'Donnell, can you hear him? Understand him?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Parallel Smith, I have a question for Mr. Reed. So one of the things that you have made us aware of over time is that, particularly with John Storm Park, that we have this continual maintenance problem of replacing the fixtures, and then they get removed by parties that are known and unknown to us, and we seem to have repairing those over and over and over again. And how is that built into this? I mean, we obviously...
Those repair costs wouldn't be built into this report per se, but we can actually provide those costs associated with all those repairs.
Yeah, I don't even know the cost. You gave us some information.
Right.
By chance, is any of that covered by our insurance, or we're still self-insured, so that sort of thing wouldn't be? I mean, it's kind of vandalism that we don't have any control over.
Yeah, it's not big enough expense.
Not big enough? Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I guess I'd simply say, as Commissioner Rocky Smith has already demonstrated, his knowledge of the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center and the city's relationship to that is something worth exploring. And I'm curious, in this over $500,000, is that siding only, or does that include, was there a discussion about replacing the canvas that was destroyed over the framework?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it includes more than just the siding, yes. So that there are other problems with the building. And again, that's where we can get out, and the council has a detailed reserve replacement and immediate repairs that identifies each cost specifically. So you can review, and we can give you that information directly.
Yeah, I'm curious whether you're planning on replacing the canvas, because that was a lost venture last time. And I didn't want to know if that was included in this $500,000, but I guess I can look in the report and find that out. So thanks.
You haven't provided that detailed report to us, right?
The individual site reports, we have not sent those out. That's a pretty large file that we would need to send out to everyone.
Yeah, it would be about a 40-page report for each park. And
so I guess so is the direction to our commission, if they have questions about a specific site, to follow up.
We can provide that information.
Please email Kendall and CC Tony on your request with your list of sites that you would like detailed information, and they can send you that information. Commissioner O'Donnell, do you have additional questions?
I do not, sorry. I'll lower my hand.
Okay. Right, please continue.
okay, and again, we have the same system expenditure table for the park buildings, so you can see where the costs are being allocated in terms of building systems rather than just, and this would be for all of the 7 buildings combined. So you can get an overview if you want to look at them as a group rather than individually. So that you can see the facade expenses are pretty high. And again, the lighter purple costs are the higher dollar amounts, just to draw your attention to that. And then again, there's one minor safety issue, and then mostly it's things that are starting to wear out, or it's items that are in need of replacement because they're failing or have failed. And then you were asking about replacement reserves for the park buildings, and the Buena Vista House, I believe, is the top one on that list. In terms of there were no immediate repairs, but there are costs over the next 2 and 3 years for that building. And again, as Kendall was saying, that's really to replace what's there now. It's not modernizing the building. It's just to replace sort of a like-for-like situation. And it's not, if you had program requirements to improve or change the use, then we have not taken that into account. And then again, this is the next, the 11 to 20 year term for the same buildings as far as potential replacement costs or repair costs. And then this is what I was talking about with facility condition index. When you look at the buildings, that they're all, the current facility condition index is in general, they're all good or fair condition, but over time, if you're not spending money on the buildings, they will start to be in fair to poor condition in 10 years from now. And so it gives you a way to look at the buildings, and with the repair cost divided by the replacement cost, it equalizes the buildings. So you're seeing a percentage there that, and the buildings can be compared equally. It's not one building that's bigger overshadowing a smaller building.
So, judging on your previous comment, when we get to the final column in 10 years, if we don't expend any monies to upgrade those, they will reach a point where it's not financially advisable to repair the building. It would exceed that 30%, and you would replace the building. Is that correct?
Well, it's more nuanced than that, because you may have a historic building that the community wants preserved, and you need to say, gee, if the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center wagons are really important to the community, then you don't want to tear them down. You want to spend the money to replace them. but it gives you an idea that if you don't do something, it will be a problem, so that you can start to plan for that and start to plan the discussion around making that decision.
Understood. Thanks.
Can you tell me, for the buildings that you looked at, did you, when you did your evaluation and walkthrough, was there anything in your data collection that commented on the facilities that had people occupancy? So there was a human occupancy versus, like on a regular basis, versus a restroom that had periodic occupancy. And where I'm getting to is then you get to like life safety, seismic retrofitting, stuff like that. I assume, did your evaluation veer anywhere into that category, or did it stay neutral?
A little bit into that category, because the buildings that appear to have more use, the interior finishes will wear out faster. If buildings that are areas that are employee only, that don't get as much use or don't have any vandalism, will last longer than public restrooms in a park that's heavily used. And so we didn't really look at whether the buildings need to be modernized to serve the public in a different way or to change them, but we do look at the amount of use or the amount of wear and tear that they're getting.
I guess that would be something to consider maybe in future. If I guess I would be interested in knowing, like, when you're looking at all these facilities, which ones of these buildings have people that occupy within those buildings. To me, the life safety factor would go up, and that would help prioritize maybe some buildings, versus a tool shed, for example, or something that was structural versus, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do, and I think that's why we brought out these 7 buildings into park facilities, because the buildings that are still with the parks are the tool sheds and the small restroom buildings, the buildings that are not really, they're not that important. So, if you have it's important to have a restroom in a park, but it's not the same as the Buena Vista House or the Pioneer Community Center in terms of how they're used or how large they are.
Right, okay. Commissioner O'Donnell?
I need to put my hand down, sorry.
Okay.
And one clarification on EOT, the Henderson.
Closer, Kendall.
Oh, can you hear me? One clarification on EOT, the Henderson building does incorporate that building for those offices. And the issue with the sidewalks, that was identified at Chapin Park, and there was also an issue with the sidewalks at the cemetery as well.
And then, earlier I mentioned that there is a database available to city staff that they can log into over the internet that we call Asset Calc, that we've developed. And we put the collected data into it, and the city can get reports out of that. If you want to resort the parks or the buildings into different ways, they have the ability, and we'll be training the staff to use that. If you want to look at priorities, there's a way for them to go in there and search through priority information or assign priorities. And there's also ways to get key findings out of the reports at a citywide level or at an area level. If you wanted to look at all the parks within a quarter mile of the river as a one group or something, there's some flexibility there for the city to get information either as Excel or PDF, whatever documents you might need. And then, this is just one sample page of that, where there's a building list identifying each building, and all the photos that we took are available to city staff to download also as a JPEG file if they need to put those into council presentations or make them available to residents if they want to see information. So there's a lot of data in there that's available to the staff, not just what's in the presentation tonight or what's in the reports.
So within the folder of city facilities, I think that says, is that a 5 or a 6? I can't quite tell. So you open up that folder and it'll be city facilities of City Hall or this building or... Yeah,
there were a couple of, I don't think we looked at this building because...
It's new, yeah.
Yeah, it's new, yeah.
This building was actually included in the assessment.
Oh, it was, okay.
This building was, City Hall was included, the Community Development Building was included, the library. But for this presentation, we wanted to focus just on parks facilities and parks. But those facilities were assessed as well. They have a similar report.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
Right, and again, that's really all that we were going to talk about tonight, other than answering questions and talking about what information the staff has the ability to go in and get information, or we can help them with looking at the information. Again, you can go through, as I mentioned earlier, and look at all the roofing needs or look at all the plumbing needs for the next 3 years if you want to group things together. You can also adjust the inflation rate if you think it's going to be higher inflation for the next couple of years and see how that affects the needed funds.
I'm looking at the staff report, and the staff report reads like you're asking us to approve a contract.
Release an RFP.
Well, the next
And to
step,
do an RFP.
Yeah, the next step for us is to do some research on funding options to tackle the deferred maintenance. And we were asking for permission to move forward with doing some research, because I think back in 2018, there was a report was given listing some of those funding options, like a park utility fee or a bond or a levy in regards to tackling some of these issues with deferred maintenance. So what we would like to do with this information is take it to the next step and do some research and figure out how we can address some of these issues and have a funding mechanism so we can tackle this deferred maintenance.
Commissioner Smith.
I don't know if the construction dates are listed on all the facilities, but on page 27, a lot of those are incorrect. A lot of the buildings at the end of the Oregon Trail were added later, not 94.
Well, and again, if there's a different year that we thought they were all at that time, or the database is showing them when the park started, we can adjust that if there are different construction dates for some of the buildings.
Okay, so Kendall, can you please clarify, are you looking for something, is this just an update for us, or do you have a request of the City Commission tonight?
The request is to approve us moving forward with contracting with the consultant to research and analyze funding options to address the department's deferred maintenance.
And we've not explored that before in any way, shape?
That's what I thought. I was like, I thought we had already, I mean, granted, probably with different numbers, but I thought that we had already invested time and effort into looking at funding options.
We looked at funding options. We had a long list of options, and we narrowed it down to a handful. And then we stopped to do this work. And so now we need to decide, is looking at a tax increase, a parks utility fee, a general obligation bond, are those things that we're interested in to start to tackle this funding for these projects.
And we need a consultant to help us with that?
Well, we can utilize a consultant. We've also had conversations with finance to do some research. We also would recommend that there be some type of public engagement to see what the community would feel comfortable with, if they would be willing to move forward on some of these options or not. So that's the goal.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I concur with you, Mayor. I mean, what is it we gain from a consultant that we don't have the ability to do within our own house? I mean, we know the options on how to approach it. I don't understand why we need to hire another consultant. I mean, sometimes I feel like I don't need individual departments. I just need a purchasing department to buy what I need. So what is it we've got here that we cannot do in-house?
I could go either way. If the staff feels that they need a consultant, I want to be supportive of them to do that. We have a small base already because we amended the city survey to ask that question. And even though it was only 341 respondents, we have a little window into what the community, small portion of the community said about, yes, they would be willing to support some additional funding for parks. It rated very high, right up there with the police department. So, I mean, I think that that's a good omen, and I have no problem supporting your request. Which way you want to go, please move forward is my suggestion.
So I think Commissioner O'Donnell needs an answer from staff, though, on his question.
I think what we were thinking of was that we would do similar to what we did with the police department, with the water rate, in terms of bringing in, looking at those options, what those lending costs are, potentially look at engaging the community to get feedback to determine which is the best option to move forward with, to utilize the consultants to help with that, with a similar fashion that we've used with other projects where we've tried to go out to the voters for approval for additional funding measures. The only one difference would be, obviously, the city commission could approve a tax increase on their own, does not require a vote, as well as put in a parks utility maintenance fee. But it was trying to flush out what seemed to be the top 4 options of how to provide additional funding to address the deferred maintenance that there had been.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, we obviously understand the financial vehicles that are usable because they're just recited. So then the only question is, we can get our feedback from the community at the ballot box, or we can construct a simple survey internally and send that out. I'm not enamored with always hiring consultants, but again, that's my opinion.
All right. So is this going to come back to us? Are you thinking on a consent agenda, or this is essentially go forth and you'll do an RFP, and after you have vendors and you've done the RFP, then you would come back to us for approval to spend the money?
That was the intent,
Yes.
But if you'd like a different vehicle for more discussion, we could certainly do that.
My struggle is I feel like the staff report doesn't actually provide any detail on the RFP, so that's why we're asking these questions, because we're not sure what the RFP, what it is that you're asking us to approve. It's not clear to me. I feel like we've talked about community engagement, we've talked about funding. So I think that's the struggle for me personally, is that it doesn't actually lay out anything about the RFP, or very little about it of what you're going to do. Other commissioners, do you have comments?
I agree with you, Mayor.
I agree with the mayor.
All right, so can you come back? So I guess the options would be maybe come up with what you're, ideally, if you're doing an RFP, you've already drafted a scope of at least what, or thinking of what the work would be of what you're asking them to propose on, right?
Yes, and similar to what Tony just referenced in regards to researching what the best options are, pros and cons for those options, doing some public engagement to try to get feedback from the community on what they feel comfortable with, and bringing that information back to the city commission, hopefully to make a decision on next steps and what you guys feel comfortable with.
It sounds like you'd like additional information, so we can provide that and have another discussion once you've had a chance to review it.
It'd be helpful to know, too, you said a budget impact is unknown at this time. Maybe it would also be worthwhile to know, like, how much are you thinking this consultant's going to cost? Ballpark?
Well, I have had conversations like with Public Works about what it costs for them to do their research. And so we would think that it wouldn't be as expensive as what they're doing in regards to their research for their ballot measure. But they're spending about $90,000 on their consultant at this time. So we want to do some more research and figure out what all that entailed and what we could afford.
All right. Sounds like your request needs to have some more refinement.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is that it for this item? Then we'll go to the other parks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it is 8:45. I'm looking at the agenda items that are left. We also have communications still. Well, we can't skip communications every time, otherwise we're never communicating with each other on what we're doing. How long do you think staff, each one of these presentations, the Housing Choices Code update and the original first presentation from Parks and Rec on financial support?
Hours wouldn't be that long. Probably
I can't hear you.
It would be about probably 15, 20 minutes at the most.
Oh, I believe you said 15 to 20 minutes for the first item.
We believe we can do the presentation in 15 minutes, correct? Yep, 15 minutes.
All right. So are they both just updates, or are you asking for 50 policy questions like Mr. Lewis over here did initially? And I'm just jabbing at him. I'm kind of kidding.
Ours is just an update so we can move forward with cost recovery.
We're asking for one major policy direction.
Is it time sensitive?
There is a time-sensitive nature, but you don't have to do it tonight. We could get it on a future agenda item as needed.
All right, let's do at least one more, and then we'll see how we feel after that. Let's try to finish out these parks items, see if we can get done. Is that Rochelle?
Yes.
Kendall, are you going to introduce this, or we're just going to turn it over to Rochelle?
Sure, I'll introduce Rochelle. So on June 8th, the Parks and Recreation Department brought a draft of the financial support and sustainability strategy policy to the City Commission, and a request was made to bring back examples of how the policy would impact fees. There was also a request to see examples of the department's communication plan to the community. So tonight, Rochelle will be presenting that information to the City Commission.
Okay, good evening. My name is Rochelle Anderholm-Parsh. I'm the Recreation Manager for the City of Oregon City Parks and Rec, and thank you for your time. I'll try to keep it quick here. So tonight's objective is we brought back our master fee schedule as it relates to our subsidy goals and recovery or cost recovery targets, and we're also going to briefly review with the Commission our strategy for our communication plan. So those were the two things that at the last work commission session were requested that we come back with. And so the data in the presentation that we had sent to your agenda packet includes the 2021 and the 2020 rates. And we're going to talk about our 2022 and our 2023 rates as it relates to our subsidy goals. Again, as the policy, it was requested to see it in action, so that's an example of what we're providing today. The data will also talk about the current cost recovery of some of our master fee schedules, our target cost recovery, and then what we would need for a required increase to meet some of those metrics. Okay, so here's an example of our pool drop-in fees. So as you can see on the right side under target fees, that would be if we raised our fees to meet our target cost recovery. So on the bottom, I don't know if this has a pointer, but you can see that there's the current cost recovery. So under our drop-in range, our current cost recovery is 22%. The range on the continuum, so if you all remember that continuum that we provided in the previous policy, ideally we want to get to our 15 to 40% cost recovery range. And so we're thinking let's try to make 30%, which means we would increase our fees 35%. And you can see in 2022 and 2023 what that would look like. And then the increase would continue at 3% annually, which currently exists in resolution. And then after that, we would raise it $1 annually to reach roughly 40% until we reach our cost recovery max. And then that's where we would start to do the analysis and identify what our additional ranges would be after a series of a couple of years. Here's an example of our facility rentals. So you can see our current cost recovery is 26%. Our target, we're going to hopefully try to reach 35%. And rentals on the continuum, because it's considered an individualized use, it was higher on the continuum, and I believe it was 100 to 170% cost recovery. And so this is where we're addressing that incremental increase that we had spoken about last time, and how a couple of factors play into it. What can the market hold, and what's palatable for the community? So we realized if we tried to get to that 35% cost recovery, it's a goal, it's a way that we can incrementally introduce this to the community in a way that's fair, and we're not shocking the community. So you can see our target fee there on the right is 107. And then our fees, you can see them on 2022, 2023 is a ballpark of how we would raise them percentage-wise to reach that, eventually that target fee. So here's an example of the park shelter and our current cost recovery for park shelter fees, which is actually really great news, is almost 92% cost recovery. And so our rentals, again, it falls under that rental category, which is 100 to 170% cost recovery. So in order to reach just the base of the 100% cost recovery, we would raise our fees approximately 8%. And then you can see the ideal fees under the resident target fee and the non-resident target fee. That's what those fees would look like if we were to reach 100% cost recovery. We would also implement a portion of the policy where there was a resident non-resident fee. So currently aquatic and recreation programs and services do have resident and non-resident fees. So if somebody's entering the community from a non-resident, they're using the park shelters, we'll ask that they pay slightly more to help subsidize that individualized use a little bit more. Field rentals. So one of the things that we identified through our cost recovery work is that currently we are not charging for field use. And so it's a program that has been 100% subsidized essentially, and field use can be considered on the continuum very individualized use. And so to identify and how that first year we would get to our 100% cost recovery metric, the price per hour is about $3 an hour. If we wanted to, in 2023, meet that 170% cost recovery, it would be about $5 an hour. Now, the important thing to note about this is these field rentals and this would fall under user agreements. So we would work with groups that are repetitively using fields. The example that I used last time was the pool. We have a user agreement currently with them. I'm in the midst of doing a market analysis of what people are charging per lane, per rate. And so that's where we would identify what we would start charging people so we wouldn't be subsidizing those individualized uses.
Rochelle, I'll interrupt you for a moment. Do we have a user agreement with Oregon City Youth Sports, who does much of the maintenance on some of the baseball fields?
Yeah, currently at this time we do not, but I know that those conversations, Kendall's been having some of those conversations. Mm-hmm.
Very good, thanks.
And then this is the Pioneer Center's rental rates, and you can see our current cost recovery is at about 20%. And again, this is a demonstration of how we would incrementally raise fees. And so if we wanted to reach our target cost recovery of 30%, we would raise the fees by approximately 50%, but it would be incrementally over 2 years. So it would be $10 in 2021, and then $10 in 2022, and then $10 in 2023. And then we also, one of the things I'd like to mention with our master fee schedule is we also not only do we identify the ability to raise fees to increase our revenue, but there were some examples of expense management. So are some of these indirect costs very high intense administrative costs, and can we lower those indirect costs to also improve our target cost recovery? That analysis will come out when we do our cost recovery work with the Amelia Consulting annually. So that's the other way we hope to meet some of these metrics. And then the communication plan, this was important, and we feel that, again, like nothing should surprise the community. And Aquatic and Recreation, we do have a mechanism that we have been raising fees annually. And so we would do several different ways to implement or educate the community on raising our fees, our master fee schedule. So the first one would be, hopefully, if we take this to a resolution, we codify this policy, the department would display our model on the website, summarizing our work and a list of our objectives and intentions. And then we would email the stakeholder group that assisted with our cost recovery work during the public engagement phase. We'd meet with the community user groups to discuss user agreements and fee adjustments, and we'd start that work. Some of it we've started now, but our goal would be to have user fee agreements in place by July 1st. And then we'd post the fee adjustments in the city publications, so for example, the Trail News. And our goal is to provide at least 6 months of notification, and then we would use our other city marketing options to make sure people have at least the 6 months notice for that. And then we'd work with our community partners to continue fundraising efforts for our scholarship program. And then we work to align our practices with other city properties. I know last work session, the conversation of the end of the Oregon Trail came up as far as aligning whether we waive fees. And so starting to have that conversation with the folks at with the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. And then we'll attend community meetings to speak about department cost recovery efforts and solicit sponsorship. And this is where, for example, we look at the movies in the park or a summer concert series, which is highly subsidized, and offsetting those costs by soliciting additional sponsorship, community businesses, and also identifying expense management. And then lastly, our goal would be to continue the analysis process and then publishing those metrics on our website. So when we get through a year of this cost recovery, we're going to go back in, we're going to work with a consultant, identify how we've been doing, and then hopefully celebrate our successes and be able to communicate that with the community so they can see what we've been doing with their taxpayer funds and what services it's been subsidizing and how it's benefited the community in whole. So that is the communication plan. And tonight, we're just requesting if the commission would support the sustainability policy as a resolution. We'll bring it back to you as a resolution for support and codify the policy. Two, the other option would be to support the policy with further edits. And then once we incorporate those edits, the commission feeling comfortable with us bringing the edited policy back for a resolution. 3, ask for additional edits and have discussion and then come back to an additional work session if you would like us to, or for general consensus not to support the strategy, the sustainability strategy. So at this point, I know I flew through that, hopefully it was, but if you have any questions or discussion or comments, I'm happy to take those, and thank you for your time.
Commissioner McGriff?
I just want to suggest, I like all your suggestions, but let's just face it, not everybody's whipping on the website like some of us do. So maybe a possible mailer in the water bill, or excuse me, the utility bill. Sorry, you can just tell how long I've been here. It used to be just a water bill. Also, you've got the stakeholder group. What about, you obviously have a list of people who have used the park, and maybe not everybody, the parks, maybe not everybody that's on those lists are residents. So you've got a way to contact them by giving them some information. I was just trying to think of some other avenues that might, in addition to, because you say, all versus the city marketing, but there's always that one thing that we don't always think of that people are, I like the Trail News because, people do try to read that, I know. So I think that's good.
Yeah, I wrote those down. We've become really proficient at getting a hold of mass amounts of people because of COVID, so we can send out, emailers, and yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Commissioner Smith.
It's easy to find.
curious about RV park and cemetery. Were those gone through, do we have the same, did we go through the same process with those?
I'm sorry, Rocky, or Commissioner Smith, can you repeat the question? I didn't hear you, actually.
Cemetery and RV park.
Yes. Yeah, so we did do cost recovery for the cemetery RV park, or the RV park, and the RV park actually was at a 98% cost recovery. And our revenue for the year of 2019 was $108,000, and our expenses were $110,000. So in the cost recovery realm, we're doing really good at the RV park. There was a whole different series of cost recovery and tax subsidy analysis for the cemetery as it relates to the specialized services. And if you're interested in that data, I don't have that with me today, but I can bring you some of the or I can send you some of the specialized services cost recovery.
Just to give an example, besides selling the plots, what else do we do there?
Oh, I think selling the plots, and then they sell headstones.
Okay, headstones.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I can.
I know. Well, we don't plan on being there for a while, so we're not paying attention to that.
Commissioner Smith, do you have additional?
I did have one more question. Because there was a breakdown for the parks and all of this, I actually have no issues with it all. It looks really good. I guess it stops at, in terms of park usage, park shelters, picnic tables. I'm curious about the breakdown for large events and renting the entire park. Have we not got there yet? Is that something we're waiting for to go through that process, or is that part of this as well?
So the analysis, and I wonder if I apologize if I skipped over that slide, but there was the shelters, and then we did break down the special event permitting, and that also included the event park usage. And I wonder if I can go back to that slide, but it was in the full version of the information that I provided in your agenda packet. I thought, but it does, Rocky, to answer or Commissioner Smith, I apologize, it does show how those fees would be increased in 2022 and 2023, meeting the cost recovery metrics for the special event park usage. Let me see.
I didn't think I saw it either.
Yeah, I bet.
The pool.
Yeah, so I did not make the slide presentation, but it is in the full report.
I didn't get in there, so if you could show me.
And I'd be happy to send that.
Okay.
Yeah. There was a PDF of an Excel spreadsheet, but I can absolutely make sure the group sees that.
Are we reevaluating entire park usage, and particularly Clackamat?
As far as a future concept plan or master plan?
As far as future rentals?
Yeah, I think that is a larger conversation that Kendall and I have been having as far as the shelter rentals and who, the use of the shelter rentals and the rental process, the online rental process. Yes, that's a conversation that we've talked about.
It's basically yes or no, so thank you, yes.
Yes, yeah, we have.
So Jacob, can you pull up the one that actually shows it? There's two different, there's the working draft master fee schedule, different format, is the one that doesn't cut off. The other one actually cuts off the information. The PDF actually does show the permit fees, but that was a specific question that Commissioner Smith has asked about this multiple times, so I think it's worth making sure we go over what it is, because I missed it too. It's cut off in the other PDF. Yes, that one on the. It looks like it's on page 3. There it is. So maybe, Rochelle, if you could talk about that special event permit fee and the park usage, since I know we have been asking, Commissioner Smith's been asking about this for quite a while.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we identified, so just we talked about the shelter rentals, so I'll move on to the next box. It's the special event permit fee. That we did leave in 2022 and 2023 because as far as that, it's a simple fee. There wasn't any direct or indirect costs. That was purely associated to some of the administrative costs. So we left those fees. But what we did take a look at is under our special event park usage, the current cost recovery is 35%. And because these park usage fees, are 100 to 170% is our range that we're hoping for. We incrementally thought our goal would be a 45% cost recovery. And so you can see our target fees for resident would be $216, non-resident would be $236. And then in 2022, we were proposing going from $175 to, $170 to $175. So looking at a $5 a year increase. And then again, looking at expense management. And I think a lot of that goes to some of the items Commissioner Smith has mentioned in the past about our certain aspects of the event permitting, heavily administrative intensive. Can we save some indirect costs on that aspect? And regarding the portable toilets, that was a to be determined, and that was the rate is dependent on the vendor pass-through. And then we are having conversations with parks about exploring leaving this up to the event organizers, which would be an expense management in itself. And so those are conversations that we're having currently to potentially identify expense management and lower some of our indirect costs.
Commissioner Smith?
I'm having a hard time reading this, and so I'm going to have to look at it more, but am I supposed to assume that the numbers are per area of one park?
So yes, I believe the special event park usage, it breaks it down into the different areas or the covered areas of certain parks for the special event fees. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's hard to tell what that means when you're renting an entire park.
And they do have, there is a daily fee that's broken down per each park, but that's some of the other things too that we're looking at procedurally that, based on previous conversations and feedback, is the special event permitting process, is that something that could be looked at as far as more streamlined? Are the fees and the structure in place that we would necessarily need that is externally customer service facing? So those are some conversations that, yeah, absolutely, we've been having.
The porta potty question was brought up a year ago or 2 years ago and never came back. So, and that in itself, in just that one meeting, was an hour discussion. I've probably been asking about this for, a decade, and actually more than that. Before I was a commissioner, I've been asking about this. And so brushing over it with some numbers like this doesn't help me at all. This in itself, the special event usage of parks, is going to be needs to be a whole separate work session or a whole separate topic that could go hours. And that's got to be tied with economic development, and it's got to be tied with tourism. And we've all had that conversation. So if this special event park is being wrapped into this package isn't going anywhere with my support in a while. But everything else looks great. I just can't move forward not knowing those answers to that real specific special event park thing, because that's been a big issue in this town, especially when our visioning and our whole goals retreats and all these things of talking about how important community events are and how many community events we've lost just because it's so difficult working with the Parks Department. So I'll leave it at that.
So is the issue a function of the process of doing a special event, not necessarily the pricing? Is it the process?
All of the above.
All of the above. And,
actually, I mean, what I'd like to know is like, okay, what would it cost? What does it cost an organization right now to rent the entire park of Clackamas Park? I can't see that from this thing right here. I don't know what that. I can't make sense of what these numbers are referring to. So I want to see all of that.
Through, and then you're not coming through, and then it sounds like you're gargling. So
Well, you as well.
I know, and that's part of the problem. So I apologize. Could you be succinct and say what the question is? Because I couldn't hear part of what you said.
Both the process and actually the fees, all of it.
What is the process and the fees for special event rental?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
If I could make a comment, Mayor.
Yeah.
I think Commissioner Smith, absolutely. I think that's one of the things we're identifying. We broke it down into two areas like Kendall was mentioning, and one is definitely taking a look at the process. With the sustainability policy, it would be the guiding document that would acknowledge that a special event would be a rental, and then on the continuum, a rental or a special event rental would be considered an individualized use. And then that's the policy that we're bringing today that we're asking to send forward in a resolution would be to acknowledge that the commission agrees with the policy and the continuum as it reads, the 100 to 170% cost recovery or a higher tax subsidy based on an individualized use. And I think, definitely looking at the special event processing, if that's what the commission would like to see, return back in a work session. But today would be the guidance for the draft policy. And if that.
Okay, so Commissioner O'Donnell.
Oh, a couple things, some of which are questions. Commissioner Smith's simple question is, if an institution wants to rent an entire park, where does it plainly state, what does it cost to do that? And not where you have to do a selection of different things and compile them. I understand this question. I understand why you can't get the answer from this document. If I understand this document correctly, it's not an attempt to just achieve a break-even status of cost versus expenses. It looks like it's an attempt to also possibly develop a surplus that we can use for park development. Is that a true or false statement?
That's true.
Okay. Hence the 170%, hence numbers in excess of 100%. Okay, and the final question is a statement. In the past, I've worked with the previous finance director, and the numbers he gave me indicated that the RV park makes a profit as it currently stands, even with the necessity to occasionally repair it due to flood damage. I feel that we should reevaluate those costs associated with renting those spaces. I think it's underpriced in today's market, and I think it would behoove us, if we're going to keep that, to do a little bit of upgrading with maybe a few trees and some picnic tables, and reevaluate our charges, because camping on the river brings a premium anywhere I've ever been, and the use of that is high. And other than that, I say I like the twofold price structure for resident versus non-resident. But I would truly evaluate our marketing of that particular piece, because I think it's undervalued and underpriced. Thanks.
So Rochelle, when you answered Commissioner Smith's questions earlier about the RV park, though, you said that it was meeting its cost recovery goal.
So the cost recovery range for rentals is anywhere from 100 to 170%. And so we're close to our 100% cost recovery. And so we have an additional 70% that we could work towards eventually recovering and be at the top of our range. And then eventually, if there was an additional revenue that was there based on that, then having the conversations about using that, maybe that excess to help offset some of the deferred maintenance or projects that are facing the department. So it's nice to have that range. So we could get up to 170% cost recovery.
So to reiterate, the reason for going over the 100 is we're focusing on, based on the spectrum of use as to whether or not something's a community benefit versus an individual benefit. And if something is more of a true individual benefit, therefore they should be paying the true fee or maybe even a markup on that, and that would allow us to bring a little bit of revenue back into the community, which is what Commissioner O'Donnell is going after about the RV park. So we could, if we went over that 100%, that would be getting at his point of saying, why aren't we maximizing things like the RV park?
Correct, and I think it helps also on the other end of the spectrum where we've decided we're only going to recover 30%.
Right.
Right, I mean, it's one big pot of money, right, at the end of the day. And so, but yeah, the 170%, when you're looking at an individual benefit, and then it gets into, you know, is there a different price for an RV parked right on the waterfront versus one back by, in the back part of the lot, right?
Sure.
I mean, I don't know, we haven't gotten into that granular of a detail, but that is what this model allows us to look at.
And so the model is essentially allowing those things that are more of an individual benefit to subsidize the things that are a community benefit, correct? Because it's all going into the same bucket, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Type of camper thing, they're not really campers, they're self-contained. And can people come there and use the park? Self-contained.
I don't see that there's any issue with a self-contained vehicle utilizing the parks. Yeah, there are inspections done to make sure that the vehicle is suitable for the park and has the necessary hookups, but that wouldn't be an issue for the RV. That would be a question I would have to pose to the parks manager to see how that's addressed. Okay.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I'll simply answer Mr. Conkle's question. Yes, riverfront camping does charge more than back away from the riverfront. And I'll say that when I recover the message from Mr. Parno, where he gave me a summary of the operating expenses versus income, I will send it to Kendall for review. Thanks.
All right. So.
Their question.
Yes. Excuse me? Yes. So the question, you're asking us if we generally agree with this policy of the idea, the theory of using the sustainable model and the percentages and individualized versus community benefit sports. And what you brought to us tonight was a fee schedule that demonstrated how that would be put into place. But we have a couple of areas that we feel like we need more conversation, or we would like more conversation around the RV park, or like Commissioner Smith's request about special event process and all. So I guess, are those things that we're asking about, like the RV park and the special event process? I agree with Commissioner Smith that it's tied to economic development and tourism and what that process is and all of that. I'm trying to figure out, like, if that should hold up, like, how does that tie to this policy question? I'm trying to figure out what you're bringing back to us. Are you going to bring back to us a new fee schedule that we're going to then approve? And therefore, these special event new fees are going to come to us and all of that kind of stuff? Or are you bringing back to us just a theoretical policy?
What we're trying to get at is for you to approve the methodology that we will be using to set prices for our programs and services. So our goal is to be transparent in how we come up with these prices. And so this model will allow us to maximize how we get a return on our investments. What we're asking for you to do is to approve us moving forward to make this policy. So this will be the model that we use that dictates all of our fee schedule moving forward.
But when you come back to us with edits to the fee schedule, that's where we can talk about that special event. So, or the RV park, say there's a range in there of 1% of cost recovery. That's when we would have the discussion of, oh, we want it to actually be 150% instead of on this table, maybe you presented it as 100%. Is that correct?
So what you're asking is, are we going to bring a master fee schedule back with the changes in prices? We can do that. That shows all of our prices and what we're moving towards. The goal was to present this methodology and show you how the methodology actually works so we can start utilizing this to come up with that master fee schedule.
Okay, Commissioner Smith.
So I want to see a conversation about parks usage, special events in itself, before we do anything. That is something we've said in many meetings in the past under multiple mayors, and it still hasn't happened.
And that's more process than this type of policy for the entire Parks and Recreation Department. That's more a process of how someone books a special event, the pricing associated with that and what it looks like. It's not how we actually come up with the price.
And if I could add, part of the intentions of this policy is for, like you had so well articulated, that it's identifying a range of tax subsidies that we're willing or philosophically believing in, that should we higher tax subsidies for some of those activities and services lower on the continuum versus some of those individualized, and then providing us the methodology and the policy to set those fees to accomplish those targets that we have set, and then using some of the additional revenue from some of the higher on the continuum to help with additional revenue for the department to be more sustainable and equitable, to really identify should individualized services be higher subsidized. And then this policy would set us up to have the ability. The master fee schedule was an example of how we would incrementally incorporate this policy, and the communication plan was an example of how we would deliver this policy and make sure that the community was aware of it.
Commissioner Smith?
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
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 Okay, so I have no problem with the communication plan. I have no problem with the general strategy, how we're implementing fees. What I do have a problem with is I did not see the rationalization on how we got those fees for special events usage until tonight. And so I wanted that explained because the numbers that are on here is not enough for me. I also think that if what you're trying to tell me was that we want to get 170% back on special events, is that what I was hearing as the explanation?
No, we're as far as our special events go, there's a current, and I just put that page away, but there's an identified, we're at current cost recovery of 35%, and over the next 2 years, so 2022 and 2023, trying to, go for 45% cost recovery and identifying what that would look like. And I think one of the other things to address, in the policy, there is a section that talks about how we are justifying setting fees. And if part of the larger conversation about the process is a concern about how those fees were established in the first place, there's a whole series of identifying of how we would do and research and justify those fees. And I think that's why the policy is so important for us as a guiding document, so we have those tools to justify that information in the future when and if the time comes that we're looking at this process and maybe evaluating those fees. And so this will give us that mechanism to do that and to ensure you have that information.
So to clarify the mayor's question, is this item coming back to us for approval in a meeting where we actually approve it, rather than just an executive session, or how's it coming back to us? Because because I'm not supportive of passing this until I have the answers to all those questions and we have that conversation. I don't think we're there yet. I'm not there yet. So I'm wondering, is it coming back to us this piece, or is that conversation of special events coming back to us in the future too?
We would like to be able to bring this back in the form of a resolution to move forward with the cost recovery policy and strategy, and depending on, we can bring the special event process at a later work session.
I'm not going to be until we go through that process, because that was told to me that was going to be on the way to getting it. So I love everything else. I support it. I will not vote in favor to support it until we go through all of that.
Okay.
Because we've been avoiding it. We've had parks come to us to talk about special event permits and usage of parks several times, and then it disappears off the radar. So it's been on our agenda for a long time, and this is just a way for us to kind of rubber stamp this and move forward and ignore that other piece. I don't want to see us ignore that.
So is that, would be the request is to tie the policy together with the process evaluation of the special event?
Well, I think it is tied together because it's tied to these fees. And I think in general, I think they are kind of tied together. I mean, you've provided I think that's part of what's being confusing here, is because I think you presented, this is what I think, you presented a theory or a model to us, and we were like, oh, that makes sense. But what does this look like in reality? So now you're back to us and you're giving us fee numbers in reality of if you were to put this model into motion. And I think the issue right now is that if we have issues with a couple of the fee areas on that model, it's not clear to any of us when the discussion about that is happening. I can't tell if you're asking us to just agree and approve a model, or if you're coming back with the fee schedule. Is there another opportunity for us to talk about the special events? And so, I think that's kind of how we're confused.
So would it help if we brought back a master fee schedule and had talked about the special event process in order for you to, and the RV park as well, because they had questions about that, where we presented some information about that and the process to another work session to hopefully clear up some of those issues associated with those particular areas?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, I think that's what the request is. The problem is we're like talking about a policy that's in thin air that you haven't provided, this draft policy or something that you want to bring back to us, and none of us have seen it. So it's hard for us, I think, to kind of say you're asking us to approve something that we haven't seen, when I don't know if we're talking about verbiage. I don't know if we're talking about a methodology, if we're talking about a set of numbers. You've provided a set of numbers. Is it all three of those things? And so it's hard for us, I think, to say, this is where I'm at, to kind of say, yes, I think in general, we all agreed with the methodology of the community versus individual and cost recovery and all that kind of stuff. But when we're talking, there's a couple of issues that I think we need to talk about in a little bit more detail that we've specified tonight. And then when you bring that back, maybe by that point, you'll have drafts of what your next step is, of what you're planning to bring back to us. Because right now, I think it's hard for us to know, are you bringing a fee schedule? What does that draft resolution look like? You know what I mean? Of what you're asking us to approve.
Okay, we'll bring it back. We'll bring it back.
Rochelle looks confused.
Just so I know, so for clarification, sorry if I was a little lost, but so you would like to see the draft policy again, and then a complete system-wide master fee schedule with the ranges incorporated, using that previous policy that the commission has looked at. And that's our next step. And then incorporating a conversation about special event permitting processes.
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Morrow?
I was just going to say that the draft policy was brought to us on the 8th of June, and I went back and looked at it because there was a revision that I had requested, just clearing things up between the resident and non-resident rates. So that was brought to us, but it wasn't included in the agenda packet. So, and I wish it were, but I went back to the June 8th one to go find it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. All right, Commissioner Smith, I know your hand's raised.
Yeah, I just have one more question. I want to be clear about this question because I don't think it's going to be helpful for staff to come back and go through the process that it takes to rent a park for an event if they haven't changed that process, because that process I was kind of assuming was changing to fit with this new policy. So if we're still charging for parks in the same way we did for special events, I don't need an explanation of it because it doesn't work. So I thought that this policy and kind of going through that was going to morph into what our special event uses process was going to be. That's where I have the problem. So if special event process is still based on the old thing that we were using just a few years ago, I don't need to hear it because it doesn't work, and there's issues with that. So I was under the assumption that as we get through this process, that was going to be mainstreamed, and there would be a conversation with the community in terms of tourism and special events, because in our goals process, we were told how aware that the community is about special events and how desperate we want to keep our special events and how our special events have died because of the process of going through the city and these fees. So it is process and fees. They're tied together, and I thought they were all morphing forward together in a new way. If they're not morphing together in a new way, then I need to see that happen before I support this. If they have morphed into a new way, and you just need to show me that's fine too. But I don't need an explanation of where we were in the past for special events, because I know where we were, and it was not well. It was not good.
So was that addressed in the current process that we have right now? Is there a revamping of the process for special events?
There is a planned revamping of the process for special events. The goal was to have this methodology adopted and make policy. Obviously, there would be some adjustments made in the pricing model, and then there would be a streamlined process for special events to make it easier for customers to get access to parks and book special events. So we were unaware that we needed to do the special events process first.
Yeah, I don't know. Commissioner Smith's been asking about this for as long as I've been on the city commission. All right, so I think in general, you're right, what you put in the staff report, we did generally agree with this methodology. I liked the methodology that you came up with of cost recovery. I think this is just an item that we need to revisit. I guess it would be interesting to know from you of if we were to move forward with adopting this sustainability, this model of, cost recovery with our fees, where does the special event piece fit into the equation? Are you saying that's next? Are you saying that's three steps from now? Or
that would be next. That would be next because we would need to revamp that process completely. And Rochelle and I have been talking about this for the past 3 months on different things that we can do to streamline this process so customers can get better customer service associated with renting shelters and booking their special events. So we've been having those conversations. But that would be the next step for us.
And the policy, yes, it would give us a tool and metrics to identify how to best streamline that process. So this would be a supporting document to that. So.
Okay, but it seems, I feel like we're beating this to death, but it seems like you're still itemizing everything separately. The porta potties are a thing, and then the picnic shelters, and then the thing, and I think that's, and that's, so if you're doing cost recovery on things individually, it's hard to know, it doesn't look like it's being looked at as a
But that's just, we brought these examples based on the current pricing list that we have. So that's why we're using what we have right now as an example. Doesn't mean that we won't change things or improve things or combine things and improve processes. We were just basing this off the current model that we currently have.
I gotcha. In order to demonstrate the model in practice. Right. I gotcha. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, I'm probably going to beat the dead horse further, but the three components of this are the methodology, which I think we all agree with, the resultant fee structure, which is an is and will be type statement in plain language. And again, from Commissioner Rocky Smith's perspective, what is the total cost of a special event type rental? And we would do well to engage him in this research because he has firsthand experience with trying to acquire those kind of things. He knows of what he speaks. And if we're supposed to be customer-based and we want to be easy to do business with, maybe get his perspective as a customer, we would do well to modify the process with input from people like him. Thanks.
Okay, so hopefully, do you guys feel like you have enough information?
We won't bring this back until we have a discussion about the process, I guess is what I'm hearing, that there's no interest to approve this model without that discussion.
Is that a question?
I was trying to clarify what I think I was hearing from a majority of the commissioners.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a majority. So is there interest to continue moving forward with this model on the assumption that they're going to come back with the special event information?
Yes.
Okay. So I think there's general consensus to move forward with this model, but we need to get working on that special event stuff. I think the challenge is I agree. I'm going to say you can't tell from the fee structure, and I know anyway, I don't have to beat it to death, but the only last comment I'll make, and this is about the communications to Rochelle, in your communication plan, when you're putting stuff on the website or in your advertisements, I haven't seen a statement that makes it really clear of what is our community receiving for fees that are going up. Like a lot of times I think our customers want to know, like, is it better water lines? Is it things that, we're fixing things that aren't broken or that are broken, it's hard for me to see that in what you've presented. So I would just try to be really explicit about what are they receiving for these increased fees. If you can't answer that question, we're probably going to hear back. And it can't just be, this is our cost recovery model. That's not a good answer for the general public, as you know. So I'm hoping we have a good answer to that question. Commissioner O'Donnell, I feel like you're about to say something.
Well, I'm just going to agree with you, especially if you're going above a break-even point. What are you going to do with the additional monies that you garner? What do we get out of that above break-even? Yep.
All right. I think we're done with this item. I don't think we have any more time for Housing Choices Code update. Apologies to Christina, who's been sitting at the back of the room this entire time. And to Ms. Turway, you've been waiting. I know. All right. Do we have our city manager report? Do you have anything for us tonight?
Not tonight, no.
Thank you, Rochelle. I don't want to go through the list of...
Can I ask Mr. Conkle a question?
Sure.
So obviously you're used to the up and down, sideways, whatever's going on with whatever's going to come out of the governor's office. So whatever is the determination, you'll post on it'll get posted on our website so we can respond to the community. I mean,
Yeah, I think the difficulty through this whole thing has been a lack of specificity.
yes, to say the least.
In general, we're requiring all visitors and employees to wear masks within buildings in Oregon City facilities. Now, it's difficult in these settings. To me, it's a little bit different. If we don't agree with that, we can have that discussion. It's difficult to talk through these masks to the public through microphones over TV. And I think historically, when we've gone through this, we've had masks on or we've had them off while we're speaking in this setting. But in general, we're walking through the buildings and staff and the general public, we're using it. I think we've been successful at it. I think we've been safe about it. We've continued to maintain spacing. But
Are we also,
it's hard in these situations.
I know. It's like I said, it's like this. It's a moving target.
I imagine, I've seen presentations where, a mask mandate's been put in place and we've had the governor speaking without a mask in front of a TV inside a building.
Right.
So
Yeah.
generally 99% of the time, we're taking all the precautions that we can.
Yeah.
And this is a risk that we just need to consider.
Right. So, and then to the situation that she has announced that we have an emergency starting, well, I guess it started today at noon and goes through the 20th.
The heat advisory?
Yes, with any of our facilities. I know a number of events that are happening this weekend, and I have been texting people, not right now, but earlier today is like, okay, what is going on with the event that wants to be at the Trail Center? That's a city facility. I know we've canceled Neighbors Night Out, other things like that, so.
Are you opening the Pioneer Center for heat?
We have a standing policy as it relates to when it's above 100 degrees in terms of having cooling facilities available through the library and the Pioneer Center. In terms of canceling outdoor events because of heat, we're not looking at that right now.
Okay.
That I'm aware of.
I know the Festival of the Arts is still moving forward.
All right, Commissioner O'Donnell, you have a question?
No, I just have a
Comment?
statement that the commission email that I think we probably all have seen from a citizen takes issue with the fact that those who are attending live are not wearing masks in violation of our own stated city policy as published by the city manager. And if we want to vary that policy and say if we establish distance, we're free to go with that. But if we state a policy for the employees, it needs to apply to us as commissioners too. So I understand why the citizen took issue with what he sent in.
I only have it secondhand from Commissioner Morrow, so I'll look at it when I get home.
All right, any other communications?
Not from me, thank you.
All right, any communications from the commissioners from your committee reports?
No.
Commissioner Morrow.
I do want to talk about, at the last CIC meeting, we heard from Jerry Herman about the COVID mitigation funding, and I'm sure you saw the letter sent to, I believe it was the Urban Renewal Commissioners, but they really want people to act on, they really want us to act on that, and I would agree, and I did let them know that that was something that we've been talking about, but we need to move beyond just the talking there.
Agreed.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, I guess I would, you hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I believe I told you at the last meeting that the Willamette Falls Legacy and Landings project, we're moving forward. We have a new executive director, Britta Stewart, and I'm sorry to say that our former executive director, Siobhan, is now in hospice care, and it's just been very sad for the organization. We have engaged 3 possible consultants to establish a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. We're looking at basically how the entire site is being interpreted and how we can bring in the additional voices that have not been able to be heard over the time of the history. So that's one of the big projects we're working on. The City Hall project is moving forward. They were so impressed, the group was so impressed with our bridge cleanup. They want to enlist some volunteers to do some cleanup at the old City Hall, and I did not volunteer, but I might go ahead and help if they decide to do that. And so that's what's going on with that group. I thank the City Commission for approving the vision for the 2040 that allows us to move on to the next step. I'm very excited about the next processes that are coming with that program, and just thank you for that. I don't have anything to report on DOCA right at the moment, but I will probably by the next meeting. We did have a meeting today, a board meeting, where we were looking at some possible options and getting an update on our last event that we had. So that is all I have.
All right, so the items I have, I don't see any other hands. In C4, the subcommittee, and in the C4 primary meeting, I missed last week's meeting because I was out sick. But in general, we are talking about the main items are trying to get funding for the I-205 project. I spoke to the Oregon Transportation Commission to try to lobby to make sure limitation, and they made adjustments to their budget so that that project could get started. There's still coordination efforts going on with Metro and those other policy committees to make sure that that project is moving forward. And just in general, just a general report out of things that I've done in the last couple of weeks. I know I missed the meeting last week and didn't get to talk about some of these things. I did have a Willamette Falls Legacy Project kind of planning meeting with Metro and staff to try to talk about how we want to move forward with the partners. We have some options there, and I think Metro is doing the correct job of taking a step back, reevaluating the current structure, trying to figure out the decision-making, because the current structure that was set up prior to having the Grand Ronde as a private property owner, and there's tribal consultation, and there's all these things, these complexities that got entered into the mix when they became the private property owner. And so I think there's a reevaluation of that structure and how to make sure that all the tribal voices are represented. And so it's a complicated conversation, and we are talking about it, trying to strategize and come up with a path forward. At the last impact meeting, which is the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, we got an update on the supportive housing services update on that project from Metro. If you'll recall, they started collecting taxes or revenues for that this year. The money is coming in slow, but Clackamas County will receive some funds to do the supportive housing. And so we just received an update on that, and due to shortness of time, I'm not going to go into any details, but if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to follow up or to provide more information for you. I also attended the Oregon Mayors Association conference that was a week or two ago in Coos Bay. That was very informative to kind of talk to other mayors about things that are going on around the state. And then last but not least, other things, I've received complaints about the following things: homeless people in downtown, the quality of pavement at the Beaver Creek Road construction. You guys have probably also heard about that one too.
Absolutely.
and that currently has a road closure in effect. Maybe now they're having to go around that poorly patched pavement. I did drive it. I will say if you drive the speed limit or just below the speed limit, you are in a construction zone. It's not too bad. There are signs up that say it's a rough road. So if you're trying to speed through there, I wouldn't advise it. You'll probably beat your vehicle to death. And then I also received some complaints, which I kind of mentioned earlier, though, about the planning department, staff, public comments, notices to concerned citizens, the whole neighborhood association process, and involvement in the land use process. So I've been fielding comments and questions about that. I spoke to the Optimist Club last week, and I'm speaking to the Rotary tomorrow. And with that, that is my communications. So even though I missed last week's meeting, I've been kind of busy, as I'm sure you all are busy as well.
Yep, I received pretty much all of those
Those topics.
Comments. Also a comment about us not approving vaccine passports, which I explained we have nothing to do with that.
Yes.
Also, unfortunately, a complaint about some racial discrimination in downtown, which I was not excited about, and we have discussed at DOCA, and we have some more discussions to have about that as well.
All right. So unless I don't see any other hands or comments, so we were shooting for 9 or 9:15, and we're way past that as usual, and so we're going to adjourn this meeting. Thanks, everybody.